hit the go live button, which means we are now live. I'll double check, make sure that the broadcast is working correctly. But last time it worked, and I'm getting a little bit better at this streaming thing. So hello, everyone. And today we're going to go over the Wizard. So in yesterday's stream, we talked about the iconic fighter. So that's Giles, played by Corey. And we went over what it means to be a fighter, what it means to be a fighting man in the system All Might Die. And if you want to check out that video, hopefully there'll be a link in the description, or you can check it out on the channel. It'll be saved there sort of in perpetuity. And we're going to try to do these for each of the classes, focusing first on kind of the primary big pieces for All Might Die, which is going to be our fighter, our wizard, and we would do cleric as the third one, but there isn't really a cleric in the game. So instead, we're going to have warlord as the third of the sort of big trifecta that is coming together as the intro classes, and we're going to keep going through the other icons. So what is an icon? So icons are the final tier of play for All Might Die. They are level 10 plus. So these are very high level characters. They're past the point where the idea of like a single wound or something is going to be lethal for the vast majority of the time. And the idea is that these are very heroic characters, right? These are going to be the legends for the next generation, are these iconic characters. And in the system, one of the things that I did to make sure that the people who were playing got to really put their mark on the world, I told all of my players in last session, or in last campaign, which I will also tell them for the future campaign, if nobody has made it to level 10 on a class and you make it to level 10, your character will become the iconic version of that character, which means when you open up the rulebook to fighter, you see Giles. It's not just a random fighter, it's specifically Giles. And now when you open up the rulebook and you look to wizard, you do not see a random wizard, you see Harland, which is piloted by Ferdinand. So Ferdinand, go ahead and introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of history. Like, what sort of background did you have in gaming and tabletop prior to joining in the campaign for All Might Die?
So I'm Ferdinand. My experience with TTRPGs in general is pretty limited. I am decently young for most people in the campaign, so my experience has been more of a first glance from a newcomer's perspective. I had an instance with 5e for a little bit until the group kind of imploded, and then there was a second campaign which got to session 0 and never got to session 1. And then I was wrapped into this campaign, and I never joined another one outside of 2 campaigns that were offered to me by community members of Dice Mice. So I don't have as much experience playing as most people do, but I do consume a lot of D&D content from creators. So I have some knowledge about the basis of 5e and what D&D and TTRPGs are. And that's about all my experience.
So I'm going to put a pin in something you said for a little bit later, because I do want to talk about this. When I'm doing my videos here on YouTube, my sort of ending for all of my Dice Mice videos, or all of my videos for All Might Die, is talking about how at the end of the day, West Marches is all about community. And just like you said, there were other community games that you played in. So I want to talk about that a little bit later, because I feel like that is one of the sort of unique benefits of playing in West Marches. But before we kind of get onto there, you've introduced yourself. Who is our wizard? Who is Harland? What is this character? And anything that you feel is like, okay, if you know one thing about Harland, you got to know that blank.
So Harland is the wizard that I play primarily. With Dice Mice, you can play a bunch of different characters. I primarily was going to, at the heart of the game when I first joined in, I was going to say alchemist. I'm going to be the alchemist character. And I had, I think, 3 different alchemists, all of which meant tragic ends. But Harland, for some reason, went on his first session, found the door, came out alive at mortality, and we're here. The biggest thing I'd like to think about Harland's character is just the magic system. Sometimes, to the party's dismay, I'll look towards the magical end of spells or abilities. Some 2 times of which got me killed on specifically Harland. But yeah, that's the primary thing is there are other focuses, but I really wanted to explore the magic system, and I felt Harland as the wizard would probably be a reflection of that.
Which is true, and we'll touch on that a bit later. When we talked about the fighter, we talked about that there are some little changes or some little revisions to the way that the fighter functions between Campaign 5, which is the previous playtest, and Campaign 6, which is going to be the campaign running this summer. And we just kind of glossed over a couple of things because there really isn't that much change for the fighter. That is not the case for the wizard. So before we talk about sort of what is the wizard going to become, because we'll spend some time on that later in the stream about what are the changes, what is the new wizard going to look like, what is new spellcasting going to look like. I do want to talk a little bit about how spellcasting worked previously. So as someone who is an outsider coming into looking at spells, what were some key parts of the way the spell system works, things that you liked or didn't like, pieces about the system itself?
So the biggest thing for the magic system that I felt I liked a lot was the version of mastery, and casting a spell from session to session you get better at. And if you got to a certain tier, or if you cast it a certain way, you get other benefits, or you could change how you casted the spell, which with my limited experience of other campaigns and other games isn't something that you could really do. In 5e and the 4e that I played, you had spell slots, which, I cast Magic Missile. There it goes. Okay, that's the whole premise of Magic Missile. Or 4e, you use a power. I know one of the ones I used was Battle Standards of Healing, which was a power from an item, and there wasn't as much you could do with it. You could put it in the ground, and that's about it. You can't change it. With this version, the spells are all a lot more interchangeable in the way that you can kind of modify how you cast them. You don't have spell slots in the traditional sense. You have willpower. And every character has willpower from the fighter to the wizard. So, your fighter can cast Magic Mouth, or the rogue can cast Bane Light, as happened a couple times in our sessions. So your willpower kind of determines how much you can cast, which is a different basis. But the willpower system and kind of the casting system and the magic let you cast spells again and again. They kind of changed throughout that premise of casting them again and again and kind of finding new ways to use them.
Yeah, and for those of you guys that are familiar with older forms of D&D, the idea of taking a spell and flipping it, of inverting a spell's power, was very core to Campaign 5, which is very classic, sort of old school D&D. The idea of, we have light, but you can flip light into darkness. You can create light on an object, you can create light in an area, you can put light on someone's face and blind them with it, right? That is a classic sort of older school system where you have, this is what it does and it is fairly explicit, but you have some alternate modes of casting. And a lot of that style is going to bleed into what I consider to be the modern spellcasting system. I did really enjoy running the spellcasting system as it was for Campaign 5, but there were some D&D isms that stayed in there that had... Some of them had really good impacts and some of them had really negative impacts. So it was fun to really say, okay, we know the pieces that we like. We have people that are really enjoying the idea of mastery, that, you can cast a spell and get better at that spell as you go along. How do we make that feel better? How do we make it feel less bookkeepy? I don't know if you have a picture of Harland's mastery or an idea, but I think you showed me at one point, and it's a huge list, right? There's all of the different spells that he has cast. He has different degrees of ability to use, and while that is very cool, it feels like, I'm doing something and I'm progressing. It can also be a lot for bookkeeping to figure out exactly what you're good at. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit later about how the magic system is going to be changing. But before we get there, I want to sort of circle back a little bit. And you said something that was very interesting here. And for some people that know about the campaign, you know that there is no, outside of potions, there's very little to no magical healing that is involved. There's not a cleric class, sort of. There's the idea of like having just healing word and you're back up, that sort of yo-yo thing from 5e D&D. It just isn't a thing in Almighty Sty. But you did mention, hey, I cast a couple spells and they killed me, but obviously you kept going. This was in the end of Harland. So let's talk about that. What spells? What killed you, and how did you keep playing after it killed your Harland, killed your wizard?
So the two times that my character bit the dust were at the tragic casting of a very, very complex spell. It's the hardest spell known to man, level 1 light. Very complex, I know. It's hard to wrap your head around. The casting itself was fine. Part of being a wizard and part of casting in this version of D&D or TTRPGs is that you use scrolls to cast, right? And they're consumables, they're once-off items. Scroll of light, gone. But you can cast without them. It just costs more willpower. So I learned kind of early on to do that, kind of instinctively, is just to cast without a scroll whenever I could to keep bookkeeping down, and also so I didn't burn a hole through my pockets gold-wise. Which had the inverse effect of multiplying with a circumstance of being in the Veil. So the Veil is like the other side of the world. We had unlocked inadvertently this altar in one of our mega dungeons that we all kind of thought didn't do much at the beginning of the campaign. One time we went in there, we were like, hey, we have a really good occultist, which just maxed everyone's weapons. We did that, somehow unlocked a portal to the other dimension. We went there after killing, this minor wraith lord. We went there, and then there was another anvil, and we used that anvil and almost died in the process, but we didn't. And I was like, all right, guys, we don't know where we are. I'm going to cast light. I'll put it on a ring. We can put the ring in a box, lay the box here, so it's like a homing beacon that we can come back to if we ever get lost. Well, cast the light spell, and apparently casting in the Veil isn't a great idea. So I had to roll a fortitude save, which is based off your con and your strength. Wizards don't have great fortitude, and there aren't many wizards that have great con or strength. So I didn't pass the fort save, and I had to roll a mortality save that was at -5 per level of the spell cast. But if you cast without a scroll, it's doubled. So I would have passed if I had cast with a scroll, but I didn't. So rolled the mortality, threw the dice, and he bit the dust. And the only reason that Harland is still a character is because of something known as the heroic injury system. So once you hit level 4, your mouse becomes heroic. Your house can start spending influence. Your skills can be better up to expert level. There's a bunch of things that come with it. But one of the bigger things, at least for me, playing with a character that has very few hit points, is if you die, you're not dead. Unless you already have a heroic injury, you can work with the DM or the GM and create a heroic injury for your character. So for me, we ended the session when he died because it was like, well, the guy who knows magic just bit the dust in the world that we don't know, that is just seemingly teeming with magic. We're going to go. So that session ended, his body was recoverable, and I ended up getting a heroic injury on Harland where he lost all of his dex and all of his con, making the fortitude saves even harder. Just really kicking him while he's down. But that's how he died the first time. Now, the second time.
Before we let me pause for a second before you get there. So, because I do love the story, I just want to kind of give some extra context real quick. So when he says, "Hey, I died, but my body was recoverable," that means like if your character is high level and you get eaten by a hawk and they fly off with your corpse, you don't just appear back in town. Like you just don't like bloop, and we're still there. Like you can still die. Even if you don't have a heroic injury as a high level character. But the idea is that once you've played a character for quite a while, you made it to level 4, you've become a little bit attached, you become a little bit invested. And so ideally there should be a little bit of bad luck protection. Just the way that the nature of these games is, you're going to eventually have a series where the dice are against you for a period of time. If you're playing for 10 levels on the same character, you're going to have a spot where, if there's no sort of bad luck protection, then you're just going to die. Like it's going to be nearly impossible to make it past those little filter points. sort of Fermi paradox style filter points that'll happen just because of the nature of dice. And one other thing I do want to do is context real quick, just for people who are not as familiar with All Might's Die and with the magic system, is he talked a little bit about casting with a scroll and casting without a scroll. The standard thing is you always need to have a scroll to cast. It is a consumable. If you've attained a certain level of mastery, you can then start casting without a scroll. But it's harder to do. So you don't have, like you said, you don't have to spend as much gold, as much downtime to craft the scroll that you're then burning away because they are consumable. But the downside is that it is much more taxing on the character. And when you cast a spell, it is going to work unless the spell kills you. Well, how does the spell kill you? Well, when you cast the spell, you know what the effect is going to be to a certain degree, but you don't know how taxing it's going to be. The difficulty of the spell, your mastery, your skill in casting, all these sort of things come into a role that say how much energy it takes out of you. And he mentioned willpower. Willpower is a little bit like having mana. And if, say, you go to cast a spell and you have 2 willpower and you cast the spell, and because of the level of the spell and the way that you cast it, it takes 3 willpower to cast. Now, that doesn't mean it just fails. The spell is still going to cast, but the spell will take its due. So it's going to take your 2 willpower, but the remaining willpower it's going to take from your life. So it's going to eat 1 health or 2 health per 1 willpower. So it's going to take you 2 willpower and 2 health to cast that spell. And if you don't have any willpower at all, you can't cast, right? You have to have something there to spark it. You can't just, cast off of your blood, as the barbarian did one of the earlier playtests, which is like, I could be a wizard if I just tank all the damage. So we stopped that. So just for quick context, yes, you can cast without a scroll, but it has to be a spell that you've already mastered. You've already cast several times, so you need to know what you're doing. And then secondly, it does take more power from you. So first heroic injury, he's weak and anemic and is able to recover over time. And once Harland recovers, he is then out on another adventure with another a trivial thing. And we have our second heroic injury. Go ahead, Harland.
So if you look at my character art, you'll see that his left eye has this weird protrusion of a red crystal, you could say. What we found in the campaign was the Eye of Cain. There were 2 of them. Now there was a lot of lore surrounding the Cain, and I'm sure when the Bard has their interview, they can talk a lot more about it than I can. All I know, eye powerful, monkey see eye, monkey want eye, right? So I decided, with the group agreed, hey, Harland can use the eye. The eye had abilities that could help with a wizard and could make sense. So we decided, hey, let's see about using the eye. Let's equip it to a character.
Equip.
The eye proceeded to crawl up his chest, rip out his eyeball, and then insert himself into the skull, which is its own story, because that also almost could have killed us if it wasn't for a certain warlord that used a certain ability. A loss of 4 permanent HP later, and boom, Eye of Cain, which was great. It was a good magic item. It served us well, but there was another Eye of Cain. There's 2 of them. We had never used them on the same adventure before, but they had a really strong connection to each other. Put 2 mice who each had an eye, and they walked in a straight line. They'd magnetize together slowly over time, right? So this first adventure that these 2 people, Eknoyeb had the other eye. Eknoyeb was very used to using the eye because it's a magic item, right? What's bad about using a magic item? Well, what we didn't know was that the eyes were so attracted to each other that if one was used, the other really wanted to be used and would force the character using it to use the eye. So the adventure that we were on, we went to the Squirrel Embassy, basically, the Squirrel Bossing Say. I forget the name of it. And we were in...
Called Arbor Asticus. Is the name of the Squirrel City.
We were in their main hub in the middle of a war. right? And we were like, hey guys, we found this hammer. You know, some guy was selling it in the market. It came from one of your high up guys. We're here to return it. And a bit of politicking later, this one person in the party, decided to use the eye to basically get a look-see, a better, like almost a view through magic of some of the characters, just so we know who we were talking to and to get a better look at the environment. Well, the eyes like to be used in tandem. So my eye tried to activate itself, failed the will save, which sucked, but that's okay. We can deal with a couple bad rolls. And the eye, I only had at the time the ability to use the anti-magic field in the middle of the headquarters, next to their spellcaster, who is arguably single-handedly keeping their entire city safe. So I almost EMP'd the Squirrel Embassy, is what I like to say. I did not EMP the Squirrel Embassy. The Eye did. I couldn't stop the Eye. Their assassin, the Squirrel assassin that was there, decided that my head was no longer needed for the environment that which we were in, and decided to make some rolls, failed which rolls, and off with his head, which one of the other members of the party, grabbed me and chucked me off a ledge with him, like grabbed the bomb and ran off the building so that we didn't EMP the guy who was actively keeping the city as safe with magic. And he survived, albeit with one of his eyes gone. The eye that wasn't the Eye of Cain. Luckily, the eye didn't fully kill Harland and then proceed to try and attach itself to the guy who saved Harland. That didn't happen, so we're all in the clear. And that was his second heroic injury, losing his second eye, which, eventually he got both of his eyes back, so it's a win's a win. But that was the second heroic injury.
Yeah, and that scene really highlights what we were talking earlier about, the idea of the filter, right? Because I think Ferd was sort of playing it up for jokes a little bit, but it was this thing of the eye wants to be used, but as the wizard, as the character that was quite high level, that had a lot of stuff going for him, it was not a impossible to fail check, but it was a very easy check to make to maintain control of the eye. And there were a couple of different abilities that could be used. There's some ideas that went into it. They had some good planning that they could do, but the dice were kind of against him. I think you needed to roll like a 2 or a 3, and you rolled like 2 4s. You needed to roll a 4, and you rolled a 2 and a 3. So it was, and this is on a D20, right? So he had 2 chances to just roll just slightly better, and it was not to be. But it did mean, he had all these things, but he had recovered from the previous injury. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is I noticed from watching you play that when you took a heroic injury both times, that your approach to play afterwards changed, right? The idea that you kind of have, I have this buffer, right? Like maybe I could still die if something, insane happens, but I'm probably just going to take a heroic injury if I'm taken down. With that system in place, tell me what it was like to adventure on Harland, on the character that you were spending most of your time on when you had an injury, like, because you did change how you approached adventures with an injury.
I preface saying how I changed with saying that wizards have a D4 health, right? So they're old school with their health, and it's not like 5e where you roll your D4, but you get your con mod. So at the end of the campaign, I put all my points into Constitution, so I wouldn't fail a Fortitude save ever again. I failed every single one, but nonetheless, I had good con. So you'd think, over 10 levels, you'll have enough health where, one thing won't kill you. But with being a wizard, if it's a harsh sword, if it's a sharpened sword just a little bit, it might be the end. So with the system in place, my style was, hey, I have the skills needed to do any of the jobs that I want to do. I'm the main magic man for my party, right? I have all these skills. Now I'm gonna go as hard as I can. We're gonna find everything. We're gonna push our luck, and the luck was on my side. when I got the first heroic injury, I did take a pretty meaningful step back, and I casted a lot more of shield spells, the inverted floating disc, godsend of a spell, and I played a little bit further back, and I didn't die too soon. I recovered. So that was the first injury. Was like, I died, but I did die from my own stupidity. Maybe I shouldn't have tried that without testing something. People might have had knowledge. Let's take it a step back. Let's slow down a little bit. And that's what happened. That was at level 4 or 5,
Four.
I believe,
Yep.
first injury. My second injury was at level 10. And with the way the XP in the way that we are playing scaled, I was only ever going to get 1 or 2 levels, and my injury was permanent. And I was like, well, if you can die from a few bad rolls, I'm sure as hell not going to let myself stop me from doing what I want to do. So I just kind of proceeded to keep doing that. And it worked out. There were times in which I was very, very stressed, and I almost died again. I almost died again at the last session of the campaign, but a different eye saved my life. I changed my approach the first way, taking a step back, and the second one I kind of said to myself, you're not really going to get much stronger as a character, Harland. You're just going to be you. If who you are is I'm going to go balls to the walls on every magic save, you do you, buddy. If you die, that's how it's supposed to be. It worked.
Yeah,
So,
I will say that from the perspective of the game master, it very much felt like before the first heroic injury, it's touch all the buttons, do all the things, flick all the switches, see what happens, and then after that, it's like, okay, well, let's think about this. Let's be sort of methodical about things. And then what I noticed is the change from heroic injury 2. You didn't go the route of let's be more defensive. What you went was the route of let's go to 11 whenever we have the chance to go to 11, right? Like I do not think I can build up my defenses to the point where I can be unassailable. So if there is a nuclear option that will lead to them not being able to do anything about it, there's some that might be the new default, right? Like option 1 is, hey, maybe don't touch the things. Let's think about it a little bit more. If someone offers, hey, I have a scroll of light, and you don't say, oh no, it's fine, I've mastered it, it won't be an issue, which is definitely what happened the first time. But then the last time it's like, well, if I have 2 options, and one option is the more moderate option, and the other option is let's do some war crimes, the default answer is going to be war crimes, which is what it was for the end of the campaign. Lots of now, not to say that they weren't warranted, right? Because I've yet to run the intro adventures for people, or any of the adventures for people, where they encounter weasels and they're like, oh, they're okay. So there's maybe 2 tiers of war crimes. There's war crimes against things, and then there's war crimes against weasels. It's sort of a lesser category of issues.
that debate with the mice that were under the weasels in the last couple sessions of that delve was a debate, because they aren't technically weasels, but they're under weasels, and we don't have a good way to deal with them. Undead army.
Yeah. So one of the people in chat said after the first heroic injury, it became let the barbarian touch all of the buttons. And yes, to a certain extent, the barbarian realized that they could become very hard to kill if they sort of invested a lot of their resources into becoming harder to kill. If they got magic items and potions and things like that could sort of lean into making them tougher to kill. To be, the standard barbarian is going to be harder to kill than your standard wizard. Your standard barbarian is probably about as hard to kill as your especially defensive wizard. Whereas then if you have your especially defensive barbarian, they're going to be harder to put in the ground than basically any wizard, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, I did want to ask you a little bit. We talked in the other game about heroic deeds and things like that, about how you're building all these things. We've talked a little bit about injuries here and about sort of surviving in spite of bad luck. But we talked very slightly about the left eye of Cain that you had, but that was a found magic item. You had a couple of magic items that you used very frequently that became pretty closely associated with Harland. Outside of the eye, which is its own sort of section, right? What would you think is your sort of favorite magic items, sort of the thing that you most associate with Harland, that you're like, oh, this was, if I'm going to tell somebody about the magic and the sort of evolution of one of my items, because magic items are a bigger part of character complexity in All Might Die than the class is, really. So your class, you get abilities at level 1, level 2, level 3, 5, 9, and 5, 9, and 14, right? So you only get 6 abilities per class, but it's pretty common for each of the magic items to have 1 or 2, or in cases of like very high level magic items, one magic item might have 3 abilities on it, which is, if you're thinking about that, that's an iconic level, a very powerful magic item has half a class worth of abilities on them. And, characters might have 4 or 5 magic items on them. So, just sort of keep that in context. The reason we're going to talk a little bit about the magic items is because that is a big part of how the characters become complex. And also because they are items that they're not on the character themselves, they can be handed off. They can be passed around so that people can share their magic items with their house members, but also sometimes it'll get swapped on adventures. So for you, Ferdinand, what do you think is the sort of Harland item that's not the eye?
The other eye. There is my main implement, which we found after really our first boss fight that resulted in the first 2 paragons of our campaign. We found the Green Thorn, which was really more the sorcerer weapon. It had an ability which basically let you cast spells using charges from the Green Thorn that I never really used because besides the level 1 light, fiasco, it wasn't inherently necessary. But that one stuck with me from, I think, level 5 during that encounter, the end of the campaign, where besides me using this true steel implement I created being defensive, which was also really important, that one traveled with me from level 5 when it was level 6 to when Harland was level 12 and the Green Thorn is now level 11. So it was upgraded twice. I had to remove one of the curses on it because the way that upgrading magic items works is that if you have a heroic deed and the level of the deed, there's ways, there's certain parameters behind what level the heroic deed is and what it can go on. But it boils down to, if you have a heroic deed and you have a magic item that was used in the heroic deed, you can combine the two basically to, instead of rolling to create one, you roll to either get a right on it, basically a quest to upgrade the item, or it just levels up. And I had that happen twice. The first time I put a right on it via that old anvil that we talked about earlier, and I completed the right. The second right, however, I had my second heroic injury during that right, so it became a curse. And we got the curse off, which is, again, its own thing, but that one was probably more indicative of Harland because of how much stuff it went through. It suffered a heroic injury itself when it got cursed. One of it was a victim, quote unquote, of the magic altar that also inadvertently killed Harland. So it was kind of with him throughout his entire lifetime. I'd say that's probably the most important, the one that I could say, that one, even though it wasn't really a wizard's implement. It was supposed to be a sorcerer one, but it became the wizard's. So.
Yeah, and it wasn't like the item says, for sorcerer on the 10, but it does sort of help with the way that a sorcerer spellcasts a little bit more than a wizard. But I did want to touch a little bit on this because this will be something that'll be coming out in a video in quite a while. Probably, I think it's going to be releasing in about a month. I've already recorded it for how curses work. in All My Style. So the idea of the heroic deed can be done, and you can get this right. You can get this rite of passage, right, to upgrade your items and to sort of evolve the story of your equipment, like you're evolving the story of your character. But the idea of a curse is a dashed hope. So it is something that you're doing. You're in the process of completing a quest or a rite or something that is important to you, and you suffer a major setback. And the combination of these two things, of every magic item is created through dramatic acts. You know, for the mice, usually it's acts of heroism, these heroic deed things that happen. That means that every item has a story built into it, right? The green thorn, just like Ferdinand was saying, had the story of how it evolved and developed and things like that. Whereas with your standard magic items, a lot of times there is a story, but it tends to be disconnected from the people that are using it. And if an item is cursed, it also has the story, right? It has, this item is cursed because I got a heroic injury, because of this other stuff that was going on. And the curse itself, if you engage with it, you can overcome it and still get the benefits of improving and working your magic item, because they're designed to be sort of story beats that you can keep working on, rather than you touch the curse thing, you know, now you're screwed because how dare you touch things. That's just not really how this works in the system. So I did want to say hello to some of the people that have joined in, and yes, for BST4, the weasels are not well loved. Let's just put it that way. Cool. So yeah, so we have lots of magic stuff and magic items things. I did want to talk a little bit about preview stuff for the campaign for All My Style. Let me see if I can. I thought I had pulled this up previously, but I think we had sort of decided near the end that I was going to we're actually going to do the video. So I have it up on the other monitor, and I'm not as good at streaming in OBS yet, but I'm going to pull up some of the stuff from the wizard here in a second. But you know, I call campaign 5 the big extended playtest, and that means that there's a lot of stuff from campaign 5 that I learned from. So the D&D, the old school D&D style magic, the ability to have inversions, the way that mastery worked. There were a lot of pieces there that we really liked, that I'm going to bring into the new form of the game for the summer and for the publication of the game. But there were some things that were not as well liked. So, you know, as the person who is the most engaged with the magic system, as our iconic wizard, what were some things about the magic system and the campaign that you thought you didn't like, or you felt, this is a problem, this needs improvement, this needs work on? Because we did go through some pretty we're going to be going through some pretty major changes between the way that the iconic wizard Harland would perceive magic and the way that the characters that are playing the summer will see magic. So Ferdinand, take it away.
So there's two parts. There is the wizard abilities, which were really entwined with magic because it's the wizard. And then there's the fundamental keys about magic. So we can start with that. Personally, one of the things that me and another person who played a pretty high-level wizard, I don't remember how high-level Tisha's wizard was, we both had a similar interest in spell discovery. So, you know, with the way our campaign turned out and started is we had spells. We didn't have all of them, but we had spells that ranged from level 1 to level 5. And, you know, we found out that there are spells that are higher level that do different things that are, you have to discover them. And the two ways in which we knew how to discover, or I guess there's three, is by esoterica, a building called the Ritualist Hut, and by just finding the scroll out in the wild. Esoterica is basically if you have two mice that are working together to create the same scroll, or maybe the same class of magic, there's a chance for something wild to happen. And you can get, say, at the beginning of the campaign, we were crafting floating discs, and we got a spell of Bastion, a level 11 spell from a little bit of colleague work. That's number one. Number two was where our biggest, not gripe, but our biggest, hey, that might need improvement came from, which was the Ritualist Hut. The Ritualist Hut was an influence building, which, you can spend influence in a lot of ways. But the biggest thing was that if you saw a spell out in the wild, and you got a check on it, or you were hit by it, or you saw it out in the wild, you can spend downtime to learn that spell if you were within 2 levels of the spell. So if you had a group of level 1 mice go out, they see this level 12 spellcaster cast a spell that's level 12, they're going to need to do some, power leveling. They're going to need to get up to level 10 to research it. And the time it took to discover that spell was the level of the spell plus 1. And that could be decreased if you had skill in occultism, which luckily my character did. But even with that deduction for occultism, it took a long time to get any spells. And outside of, the druid and the wizard and the other spellcaster classes, the fighter didn't have as much need to research the spell imbue power. It wouldn't, unless, you ask them and they're like, hey, I'll help you out. They're not going to do that by default. It's just not in their wheelhouse, and it's not as much needed. So if you have 1 or 2 mice working on a spell, like we had to work on Resurrect Undead, it took us 6 days of downtime between 2 mice. And 1 in-game day for us turned out to be about 3 to 4 days. So a week and a half of not playing our character for 2 weeks is fine. But with the rate at which we were doing things and the time between, hey, we need to go out and do this, versus, hey, now we need to go do this, the downtime demand was, you need to craft potions, you need to have scrolls, you need to do, dojo, you need to go to this place, you need to do this. And it became very difficult to discover spells because of the time demand.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last way was finding other scrolls, which you could do if you knew the right people or you were lucky. But even then, unless you found enough of the scrolls to, replicate, or you found enough to become an apprentice in the spell itself, you're still going to have to do the Ritualist Hut. And it just became very clunky to find new spells and discover them, which felt really, really slow. To the level 12 wizard, the level 9 or 8 other wizard, it's like, hey, I'm level 12. Can I cast something that's not level 1 elemental bolt? So that was our biggest issue with that. And I can talk about the wizard skills before the patch if you want me to, but...
Well, I was going to say, someone in chat, so 4BSD4 asked, so you can you can know spells of higher levels than you are. What a comment on that?
So the spellcraft, the way you cast a spell is you make what's known as a spellcraft check. And the DC is different depending upon what level you are and what level the spell is. So a level 1 wizard could try and cast a level 16 spell. They could. Are they going to die? Probably. Because the willpower demand of the spell is dependent upon the level of the spell. And you can cast things that are higher level than you. It's just a bit more difficult to make the check. And the willpower demands, if you fail the check or you critically fail the check, are really, really high. So a level 5 wizard, which ended up being the case, can cast spells that are exorbitantly beyond what they're supposed to because of one of the wizard's abilities that gave you so much willpower to use. But that was kind of unique to the wizard.
Mm-hmm.
In other classes, if you cast something that's above your wheelhouse, you don't have 40 willpower like Harland does. You might have 10. If you cast a level 7 spell and you fail, that's 8 willpower, on one spell. So you can cast and know spells higher level than you. It's just dependent upon, casting them is dependent upon how good you are at spellcraft.
Right, and one of the key things here is, if you cast the spell and you get reduced to 0 willpower, it then goes into your health. And then if you get reduced to 0 health, that's the only way that the spell fails, because it just kills you. And we did have a couple of characters in the campaign die from casting a spell, or from attempting to cast a spell, because I want to say in every instance they were casting a spell that was higher level than themselves. I do not think there was an example of a character casting a spell of their own level and dying from it. But now that I'm saying this, I think it might actually. I think there was one instance of someone having a non-spellcaster class that cast a spell at level 1 and died from it. Because it's sort of a moment of desperation. It's like, well, I think we're probably gonna die anyways, but maybe this spell can get us out of it. And actually, no. Actually, now it is worse. That is definitely something that does happen. So Ferdinand, you talked a little bit about the abilities that the wizard had, and because the wizard and because magic itself is changing so much, I did want to touch on that a little bit. So the wizard's abilities, for the most part, were kind of built around the idea of being able to kind of bolster your ability to cast, kind of being the workhorse of characters. And most of the spellcasting characters, even if you are a spellcasting class like a druid or a sorcerer, you're probably not going to cast that many spells in a day. You only have a fairly limited amount of willpower to work with, and there's that idea of like, hey, I'm level 12, I want to not cast level 1 spells. You're kind of incentivized to cast higher level spells because they have greater impact, but that also means that you're probably not as good at casting the higher level spell, which means you're much more likely to fail. And also the higher level spells take more energy, right? So there's this sort of doubling down of, even as a high level caster, you have to have care for what you cast. Pretty much, unless you're a wizard, right? The wizard has the deep well of stuff that they can be the caster that can say, all right, guys, I'm going to cast these 3 spells, and then we can start doing whatever else we're doing, right? Whereas no other class is going to be able to do that. It's sort of the wizard identity. Yes, so someone said in chat that I think someone at level 1 early on died from a critically failed spell, and yes, I'm blanking on her name. Radio. So Radio had cast a spell, and it ate her character. But it might have happened more than once. I think it only happened once.
I wonder if it was a rogue.
It was not a rogue.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure it was a warden that got killed. So the wizard, a lot of their abilities, so the first level ability, this is true in campaign 5, will also be true in campaign 6, gives them that big buffer of willpower, gives them these good mental defenses. It is their sort of introductory to the class. The second level ability, which was interesting because it was controversial, might be too strong of a word, but we had more discussion about the second level wizard ability than we did about any of the other wizard abilities, which maybe even any of the other abilities well, that's not true, except for maybe the druid intro ability had more discussion about it. But one of the most talked about abilities was the level 2 ability, Scribe, which allows you to do more things with scrolls and things, which can be very useful, but it doesn't feel as impactful as one of the changes that's happening. And one of the big changes for coming up is the Scribe ability is going to be pretty significantly reworked. So Harland, do you remember, Ferdinand, do you remember the ability to change a scroll, to kind of transmute it into a different type of scroll of the same school? That ability, or some remnant of that ability, is what the new Scribe ability is going to be. So you still get the benefit of being able to craft scrolls quickly, but it is also going to make it, when you're actually using spells, your ability to manipulate scrolls is going to be like a step above what a standard spellcaster is, which means that, we talked a little bit earlier about how, one of the things that you liked from the campaign was that when you cast a spell, it wasn't, this is the spell, this is what it does, there's no really changes, it's just sort of like fire and forget, that's just what it does. But you can really change and mutate the spells. The new magic system is leaning very heavily into being able to mutate the spells, so I do want to talk about that just for a second. So the campaign 5, the big playtest that we did, the magic system was pretty close to your standard D&D style. Something like Adventure Conqueror Kings would be pretty close to the way the magic system worked. The spells had certain... we decoupled the sort of spell tier, the spell level, from being different than character level, because I've always found that tends to be confusing for new players. And being able to have a system where it works, where it scales a level as a level as a level, is just a lot easier for people, especially newcomers, to this sort of tiered system of spells. So, we changed some stuff with that, but it was pretty standard, right? You had a spell, you could maybe flip the spell to be one different ability, and maybe that spell also had an improved sort of effect if you were a master with it. So you kind of had a total of typically 2 modes of casting, right? A normal way and an inverse way. You might have one optional way, and then you might have a mastery benefit. So you've got basically 4 pieces, or 5 pieces. You have your base spell effect, and then your 4 extra pieces to have this, what does a spell, what are all my options for the spell? And that the spells that had all of those pieces, they got so much more use than the ones that didn't. Ferdinand already mentioned Floating Disc was used very frequently, both as an inverted spell and a standard spell, and several of the other options, like they had creative uses of being able to use it to levitate, being able to use it to carry things, protecting themselves. They had all kinds of uses for these spells that were versatile, and those became the ones that sort of were the tent poles. And then you had certain spells that were very versatile and were very useful, but only certain groups really used them, right? The online group didn't tend to use things like web very much, but it was extremely popular in the offline group. Same thing with the offline group, didn't really use Shield, and didn't really use the floating disc version, the inverted version of floating disc very much, but it was a staple for the online crew. So you did have a little bit of that, but even in that instance, right, the in-person crew definitely did use the floating disc because it was versatile, right? So it got to be both of those pieces. So the new magic system, rather than it having, okay, this is Adventure Conquer Kings, or this is sort of AD&D as its core, I sort of switched where the core was focused. So if people who are familiar with sort of other magic systems, there is a game called Ars Magica, which is, if you're someone who's familiar with tabletop RPGs, if you want something that's just sort of an interesting read, that has had a pretty outside impact on the design space from how many people play it, because I've met very few people in my life that actually play this game, but I've also met very few people in my life that have been long-term designers in the field that haven't read this game. So it is one of these things where it's like the designer's game almost. And that is going to be sort of the core concept for the new magic system. And in Ars Magica, basically you have these components and you sort of piecemeal build a spell to explain how it works. So the new magic system, the way that it works is you have a verb, a power source, and a manifestation. So what are you trying to accomplish with the spell? What is your goal? Where are you getting this power from? How are you drawing energy into the world to do stuff with? And then lastly, the manifestation. How does this present in the world? What is the how of the spell? How does it form together? And so every spell is a combination of those 3 things. And it does have a pretty outsized impact on something like a wizard, like a spellcaster. So we talked a little bit earlier about how Harland's list of spells was gargantuan, not because, yes, he had scrolls on him that he would carry with him, but they tracked all of his masteries for, I've cast this spell this many times, I've cast that spell this many times, and it just sort of ends up having this sort of bookkeeping element to it, which is good in a certain way, right? Because it's showing your progression, but also it can be kind of unwieldy. And especially there were a few times where someone will be like, I cast a spell, I make a spellcraft, and they realize, 30 minutes later, oh, wait, I went to go track my mastery and I've cast this spell 4 times. I already have 4 mastery. Crap, I could have gotten some other benefit or whatever, because these things would get forgotten. So the new system, instead of gaining mastery in each spell, you get mastery in a form. So all three of the things we talked about, the verb, the power, and the manifestation, they're all forms, and they all have a single word associated with them. And so when you cast a spell, rather than getting mastery in, let's say, create water, rather than getting mastery in just create water, when you would cast create water, that spell is create water corporeal. So that means you've got these three words, and then depending on how well you cast the spell and what your skills are and things like that, you'd get to gain mastery in one of those three things. So let's say you said, all right, well, I'm gonna put my points in create, right? That's gonna be the thing that I'm gonna focus on. Then when you would cast a create fire spell, right? I want to do like burning hands. I'm going to create fire corporeal. You're replacing the power, but you're using the same creation word. So you get your mastery of creation magic into that other spell. So it's a little bit more transferable between the other things. And instead of you tracking what could be dozens or, maybe 50 different spells, instead you have these keywords, which are three linked sets of words. So there's three categories, and each category has three words, and they're invert. So you have like your verb has create and destroy. So you have those two things which make up that one chunk. And so for all the verbs, you only have 6 of them total. So you can reasonably say, oh, I'm going to focus on, being a master of creation magic, being a master of this type of magic, and then kind of build all those things in and be able to sort of move that idea around. And that is what the change for wizard is going to really impact, is anyone who can want to, you can invert the spell still, but instead of it being a sort of binary, oh, I cast light or I cast darkness, instead of it being like that, you're inverting the different pieces of the spell. So you can say my create water corporeal, I can change the create part to destroy, and now I'm destroying water, which destroy water was definitely a thing in the campaign 5. It was cast pretty frequently. Or you could say, no, I'm not going to invert the first word, I'm going to invert the second word. I'm going to say, I'm going to create fire corporeal. Woof, here's burning hands. Or you could say, no, I'm going to create water, but I'm not going to create it corporeal. I'm going to create it incorporeal. I'm going to create it in the veil. So I'm going to make a spirit shroud. I'm going to make a mist to protect ourselves on the other side of the veil of death. And that means that each spell, you have the way that you can typically cast it, and then you can invert each of the 3 words. And then if it's a scroll that a wizard has some mastery in, they can flip any of those words and then get another one, right? So normally you can't destroy fire corporeal, right? Because you can only flip one of the 2 words. But as a wizard with a scroll, you can say, okay, I can flip one of the words on the scroll, and now I can flip one of the others. So you kind of just have this expansive spellbook where a wizard might have, let's say, 3 scrolls. But if those 3 scrolls have little to no overlap on them, those might represent something like 20 or 30 different spells because they have the ability to sort of mix and match and swap over. And I have not talked to Ferdinand about this before, so this is, I think, his first time hearing about it. What are your initial thoughts as the wizard for this is how my scroll book is going to look?
My first initial thought is casting without a scroll still a thing? And is there a limit to... My first thought is, okay, we know create water corporeal. Okay. Let's take some random verb, let's keep water, then let's take some random other manifestation and just plug those 2 in there. Is there a way to do that by itself, or do you need to learn of the verbs first?
So it's 2 different questions. So your first question, can you still cast without a scroll? Yes. So depending on the way that you build the campaign, and I've built the rules for how to build the campaign out. I have not decided which rules we're using yet. So there is a version of the rules that you can't cast without a scroll, just period. I'm not going to be using those for campaign 6. So there will be some version, but depending on how hard you want to make that, it'll change certain things. So you will still be able to cast without a scroll, but you'll need to have a certain amount of mastery, and you can get 4 points of mastery in each word. So, if you have a mastered spell in the old system, you needed 10 points of mastery in order to fully cast it without making a check. The same thing is true here, right? But you have a total of 12 points that you could have, right? So you could be, let's say, a master of create and a master of water, right? You've got 4 create and 4 water, and then you'd only need 2 points in corporeal to be able to be a master. And to be an apprentice, which means you've got 4 points, you have to master one of the words, right? So if you only had creation mastered, you could still do create water, but you wouldn't be able to do it if you had, say, 3 points in create and 3 points in water. You would have to have complete mastery in one of the words. So definitely still a way to do it, still a way to cast without a scroll. And then I got distracted talking about that, and I forgot the second question. The second question was what? Remind me. Apologies.
Is there, when you're creating scrolls, can you just plug in random, like, if all 3 words, can you just plug in random words that you know, or is there something to prevent you from doing it?
Gotcha. Sorry. So the words don't change. So the way the magic works, these 18 words are the only words that can go in those slots. So you can just make a scroll. You could make a scroll that has words that have a combination that doesn't have a spell effect that you know. One of the ways that you can discover new spells is by putting these words together and then going, okay, I think there should be something like this that'll happen. You can cast that spell if you get pretty close to, and that sort of the GM can look at what sort of things exist in that slot and say, okay, when they cast a spell, are they fairly close to a spell that exists with those combinations? And if they're not, well, it'll burn away and they'll learn some stuff about it. They'll kind of like learn through sort of the battleship, right? You shot, you didn't hit anything. It's open ocean there. You know that that's not even close to what you're going for. But if you have like a near shot where it's like, okay, well, you got close, that's not quite how it works. So you can maybe have the spell work, but it took a ton of extra energy out of you, or it like works at reduced effect, or things like that. You can discover by doing. So you can just say, all right, I got these 3 things. I kind of can think of a spell that should make sense there, and be able to cast it, and then go, okay, this is what we're doing, and then have the GM say, all right, well, you put together these 3 words, you cast this effect, and it didn't work exactly like you said, but you got an effect. Or it would work like that, but you need to throw more power into it, right? Because in addition to the 3 words, you also have a tier of the spell. So you could say, oh, yeah, that would work. You're pretty certain that would work, but you just need a lot more juice, which might be your key to say, oh, those are the 3 words that we need, but it needs to be like a tier 2 spell, right? Instead of a tier 1 spell. So you can make a more powerful scroll, you can make a more powerful spell, and then go out and sort of, again, discovery by doing.
Like that a lot more. Discovery by doing. Yeah, it feels a lot better at a glance than it does in when we played. I can tell. I know what I'm going to do the second I get into the campaign. Is just throw random words at it and see what's going to happen. That's my first thought. Is, man.
BSD add, could you make a creation scroll? No. So, there are 18 words, but you need one of each of the categories, right? You need a verb, a power source, and a manifestation. So creation. You've made a scroll that has 3 verbs and has no power and no way to express itself. So it doesn't really do anything. And then kind of how the scrolls function and manifest will be built off of that idea. And one of the other things that I really wanted to play around with in making the game exploration based is have you be able to discover by doing, right? Having that idea of, we're just going to spend downtime, and man, I can't play because I need to do downtime stuff. I do think it was very successful, even if some people didn't like it. I understand. Being limited sucks, but limitation does breed creativity. Having limits is a good thing in a game. But one of the things that it was very successful in Campaign 5 was having players come to me and be like, okay, I really want to go on an adventure, but man, I need more downtime. I have so many things that I want to do with my downtime that, maybe I'm going to take a different character out on an adventure so that I can have more downtime to spend, or so that my main, I'm going to take my fighter out today because my sorcerer is busy doing stuff because I really want to spend the downtime on them. And that is something that doesn't really happen as much in most campaigns. There's a very, very small subset of campaigns where downtime matters. And even in that subset of campaigns, for me, there's even a smaller subset where the players are sitting there, they're using, okay, what does the real world clock look like? What does the real world timing look like? How do we put these pieces together? Because not only do they have influence, which is sort of this meta currency for your noble family to be able to spend to build stuff up, to get things to spend downtime on, but also there's real world triggers, right? They'll say, all right, we're going to make a meeting with this person and we have agreed to meet on April 14th. Well, April 14th does correspond to a real world set of days, right? April 14th might be, Saturday, Sunday, Monday in real life of that might be May 14th, 15th, 16th of real life. And so if you want to talk to them, you want to set up that meeting, it has to be in that window, and you have to make sure you have the right characters and stuff. So that element of, I think, making the world feel a little bit more real, make it feel like you have a reason to care about downtime is important. And someone said, so there's about 216 spells. I actually think there's quite a few more than that. I think it's 896. Let me look.
The person said 216. It would be 216 of the three variations of 6 different words, but there's 4 different tiers to spells. So you can have create, water, corporeal at tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4.
Yep. So not only that, but there is nothing that says a specific combination has to exclusively be that spell. So they are they're yeah. No, you're right though. The 216 possibilities is good, right? Because that is, hey, I've got these 6 combinations, I can mix and match them. It's 216 combinations. And then, you have the 4 tiers, which gives you the 864. And then once you get to that point, there is this thing of, okay, well, not only are there 864 different sort of spell types and spell effects, but if the players decide, okay, or if the GM or whoever's running decides, all right, well, it makes sense that these 3 words make this effect, but also these 3 words could also make this other effect, they could have a second entry on the list in the same place. And one of the reasons that it works like that is the idea that as a DM, there's certain spells that you're going to want to include, right? I've never really run a game. I've never really worked with other DMs who they run the book exactly according to how they want it to be. When I run D&D, when I have a long-running D&D 4e campaign that I run, I told them at level 1, I don't like comprehend languages. I don't like that ritual. I think it negates a lot of interesting world play. A lot of interesting storylines just evaporate with access to comprehend languages. So I remove that. And I find that that's super common. There are people that say, I don't like this specific spell, or I don't like this type of spell. I don't like this category. In All My Style, there are no healing spells, for example. You can really tailor exactly how you want it to be. There's certain DMs that really don't like divination spells. They feel like I don't like being on the hook for, the players that cast the spell and they look up in the sky and they say, "Great Sky Father, where is the plot?" And people hate that. So it is built into the system that the players know there is this fog of war, but there's no assumption that every spell that could exist is there. And it also means that when you build a spell and you build a campaign in that spell, it'll change based on how important it is, and how powerful the magic is that year will also determine whether that spell is likely to be cast. So this is the second thing I wanted to talk to you about, Ferdinand, because what I saw your face kind of like, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. So the other big change with how this functions is when I said, hey, you've got all these elements of the spell, each spell element has a value associated with it. So every word adds to the level of the spell that you cast. So your create water corporeal, well, that series of words, when the default example in the book, you always have a level, your spell is level 1 for the year, and you can make that higher, but the default is 1. And then your creation in the example year costs 0, water costs 0, and corporeal costs 0. So you can sort of make your suite of starter first level spells by being your baseline tier 1 spell, and then whatever words have a value of 0, right? Those have become your level 1 spells. In the Age of the Oak, we've built a little bit of the system out so far to be able to look at what are the combinations of words that are zeros, and they're very different. I think they are bind, instinct, resonance, which for people who played in the other campaign, that means that, and by default, that means that the revealed spells are wherever the zeros are, right? And you could have multiple zeros, right? You could have 2 verbs, 2 power sources, and 1 manifestation, right? So that's going to give you like quite a few combinations that'll give you your starter spells, your level 1 spells. But those 3 things together mean that the default spell, the level 1 spell, is friendship in the campaign. That is the baseline revealed spell, is the spell friendship. And then you kind of build all of your elements, you build your pieces to there. So the other element, right, of not only just I don't like certain types of spells, you can also say as a DM, I really like this type of magic being more costly, or that type of magic being easier to cast. And you can build your season of magic around what you feel would be fun for it to be easier or harder to cast, right? So if you have a year of magic where destruction is the easiest verb to cast, that's gonna have a different vibe than a season of magic like the Age of the Oak, where binding is the easiest verb to cast. And then, maybe destruction, I haven't looked, I don't have it pulled up right now, but if destruction has a value of 3, right? You're using your 2 level 0 or your 0 cost power source in your manifestation. If you then say, all right, well, my verb is going to be destroy, so it's destroy, instinct, resonance. That means that baseline tier 1 spell is already going to be level 4. So that means that spell, it's not going to change how powerful that spell is with the year. It's going to be as powerful as the spell already is. But you'll have those instances where, this happened and sometimes in the other campaign, where they said, oh, that's a cool spell, but I don't know if it's worth the 500 gold to cast it. It's cool. I'm not going to do it though, but not because it's not a good spell effect, because it's the sort of cost to return for it is different. And that is a big way of how the thing works.
So I have 2 questions. I think you're reading chat, so you don't want to answer them to those.
No, go ahead.
My 2 questions around here. The first one being, if, say, someone, a level 1 wizard goes out, and across a couple adventures, they build up 10 mastery in create water corporeal, right? They have enough mastery to cast create water corporeal without a check, unless that's changed.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference of tier, right? Because that's a different option that I haven't heard of yet. So tier is like, you need to give it more juice, buddy. Well, does that change the innate, like how we played? If you succeed on any spell, barring essential circumstances, it's 1 willpower, right? Is this instance where, create water corporeal as a tier 1 spell might take 1 if you succeed, but if you cast as a tier 3 spell, it takes 5 willpower. How does tier factor into the level system and the willpower system?
Yeah, so the way that the tier works is it works in conjunction with your preparation, with your scroll. So if you have you've got your master, you're going to cast, there are still benefits for the mastery, right? For the master casting, you will still have things like, for example, create water creates twice as much water if you master cast it. So it already has that built-in thing. You roll really well in your spellcraft, or you have the mastery to just say, I cast it and it's done. You're still going to get a benefit from that, which is how it worked in campaign 5. The other part where it's like, what tier is the spell? You have to ask what tier is the scroll, right? Because you have to think about the item itself. So if you're casting and you're like, I want to upcast this scroll. I've got a level 1 scroll. It's a tier 1 create water. I want to upcast it to a tier 2 spell. That means it's going to be 4 levels higher, and it's going to take full willpower cost to get up there. It's going to cost you the full 5 willpower to cast that upcasted spell. However, if you have a scroll that is a tier 2 scroll, that is a tier 2 create water scroll, and you upcast it as second, it is not. It's going to be, you're going to have to cast it as a 5th level spell, but it's still only going to take 1 willpower if you succeed. So you kind of can do both pieces, right? That sort of element of, oh, if I'm really good, I can get a ton more value out of a low level scroll because I can upcast it and just sort of deal with the increased cost, but I'm not going to fail, right? It doesn't make it harder to succeed or easier to succeed to have a low-level scroll. It's just more taxing to have yourself doing more work than the scroll is doing, which it's not impossible to have the reverse be true as well. You might have a tier 2 scroll and be like, yeah, the tier 1 version of this spell is the thing that I want. You can downcast as well, but then there's that element of like, oh man, I'm using this scroll, which is 250 gold pieces, to cast a 50 gold piece spell. Like that, there will be those moments where you can do it, but it'll be something that is less frequently done. So I do want to answer some of the people that are talking in chat. So BST said they were working on a campaign where people not being able to read some text on a wall was key. Yeah. I feel like that's a standard trope, right? Even speak friend and enter, right? He could read what it said, but understanding what it said was different. That can be your plot point, but if everyone can read every dead writing or whatever, you kind of have to lean on those things, and you can't get those moments where it's like, man, we got to this thing, there's clear instructions on how to do whatever it is we're trying to do, just nobody can read it anymore. Like, we just don't have the language, we don't have access to this anymore. And in a setting like D&D where the default setting of D&D is basically always post-apocalyptic, right? You're always playing in a world where the reason you're going into these dungeons is it's easier to go into a monster-infested dungeon to get a magic sword than it is to stay home and craft a magic sword. Because if it was easier to stay home and craft the magic sword, you would do that. You wouldn't go and fight beholders to go get their swords. You would just stay home and craft your own stuff. So we know that there's lost technology. We know that there's lost information, that there's lost empires and things. There was an apocalypse at some point. And being able to sort of take one of those tools out of the toolbox of, this is a fallen language, this is a fallen world, or you having to come up with extra pieces of it, just I didn't find was as much fun. And then one of the other things was asked is, so if I want more aggression, I can set up the easiest spells to be high damage ones. Interesting. Yes, you can do that. Although I would say the way that you would probably go about that would be to make the damaging spells be the lowest level, which is kind of the same thing that you're talking about. But the majority of spells have utility as sort of their big piece that they do, and then damage is a little bit secondary. One of the big changes from Campaign 5 to Campaign 6 is when I was designing the spell system and really making magic implements work and making sure that the spellcasters really felt like everybody can cast spells. So if everybody can cast spells, the spellcasters should feel like I get something extra from casting spells. And I did double dip on kind of how damage worked for spells, or triple dip really. Lower. Yeah. The damage of spells is notably lower, because I think it would have worked. The sorcerer rework makes the base damage on spells and some of the other reworks make the base damage on spells not needed. But I didn't want at the end of the campaign, because I did do kind of patches throughout campaign 5, I didn't want to sort of like severely nerf someone unless it was like mandatory, right? Like unless it was like, this is just broken and not intended, we need to take it down a notch. So at the end of campaign 5, we had you don't really need a lot of stuff from your class to do really good damage as a spellcaster. And then we had you can have certain spellcaster classes that do really good damage, and the two of them together meant that your wizard and your sorcerer, and to a lesser extent your druid, would do obscene amounts of damage. So we did have to kind of scale that back. One of the things that does change this actually is going to be it's going to be a little bit of a rework to magic items. We haven't talked about this as much, but I do want to kind of talk about that very slightly, even though it's not specific to wizard. In the way that magic items work in the campaign, when you have a magic item, let's say it's a magic sword. If it is a normal magic sword, it just has an ability, it has some properties, but it doesn't give you sort of mechanical or like numerical benefits, right? So your +0 sword, it just has a magic ability, it does something like that. And your +1 sword would give you +1 to hit and +1 to damage. And then the way that you had, once you got past +1, if you got to +2, one of the rules that was in there was that you would get and make a number of attacks when you went to attack with a magic weapon equal to the enhancement bonus of the weapon. So let's say you had a +2 sword. That means every time the fighter swings with their +2 sword, they're swinging twice at +2 to hit and +2 to damage, right? So they have this built-in big ramping up scale. And that was a frequent cause of confusion in the campaign. And by the same token, magic implements, they would have a multiplicative effect on the damage dice. So if you say you're shooting a fireball through an implement, you would, if it's a normal implement, you just do whatever the damage says. If it's a +2 implement, then you get double the dice damage, which was fine. But again, it had that +1 ended up being really weird a lot of times, that it caused a lot of confusion. So the new rules, it's a pretty minor change, but from the people that have playtested it, it's playtested very well so far, is just you get extra equal to enhancement, right? So your +0 sword, it just does +0. If you have a +1 sword, you get an extra attack. So effectively, a +1 sword is sort of like a +2 sword from the old system, but you always know how many extra attacks you get. And by the same token, if you cast a spell through a magic implement, you get extra dice equal to whatever the enhancement bonus is, right? So if your spell does 2d4 damage, you cast with a +1 implement, it does 4d4 damage, because you're just adding on the number of extra dice. Right. So it's very similar, but we found it was immediately more intuitive. And it does mean that especially those baned items, they had a huge impact in campaign 5, where it's like, oh, this item is +0, but it's +3 against rats. And it's like, well, if you're giving a fighter 3 swings at +3/+3 against a rat, that is a very high level magic item, and you are going to just mulch that person. By the same token, having something that I think the Eye of Cain had an enhancement bonus of like 4 against birds.
+5.
+5.
We never got to, damn it. We got to use that. Okay.
So having a thing of like, oh, I can get 5 times the dice on spells with bigger dice bonuses would have made it even more insane than it was. But it was fun to get to play and say, all right, well, let's play with sort of the strongest version of these things, see how bad it's going to be. And for the most part, it meant that at low levels, and I was going to ask you, Ferdinand, about this. Did you feel like, as I was talking to Giles yesterday, he felt like, hey, as the fighter, I always felt like I had something to do. I always felt like, yeah, there was something going on here. I felt like I always had a purpose, even at higher levels. As the wizard, right, the person who's going to be casting blow up the whole room, did it feel like you were, I know you felt like you could be killed at any time, but Did you feel like the fighters and stuff, that they weren't just there to carry your equipment, that they were, the martial characters did feel like they were kind of having a similar level of impact to you?
No, yeah. It's for me. It's a different way of impacting things. I said like please be lower damage because I was watching the stream last night and one of the things that came up was like the online players never really cast in web and the in person always did. And me and Node we talk about that because I wanted to be a lot more support focused in our last couple sessions. But for us it was like we could cast web and we could immobilize half the field. But one, I'm not nature focused, so I'm not going to be very good at casting that spell. But two, the opportunity cost of not deleting four elites off the field is just kind of eh. So I
Mm-hmm.
think with the lower damage spells, it does incentivize spellcasters to not be the glass cannon, but they're good at everything with damage at least, except for tanking hits. I think that gives them martial classes a lot more use in combat, to where it's not like everyone just hold the line, just defend until the sorcerer gets his one elemental barrage off and nukes the whole field. As cool as that is, and as that can probably still happen, it's less of a main play every time and more of like a holy shit, the stars align, get them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the martial classes, the way I feel like it differed is that, as a wizard, I don't really have much health. My physical attack is a wizard. And then my spell attack is good, but it's not meant to be damaged, right? The intent is that I have all the utility to get the barbarian past the magic door into the fight, or activate the magic altar to enhance the barbarian's weapon, or get us into a room that results at the end of the day of we're gonna smash some skulls, take home some gold. Which I felt that's where the two things lie. Or at least the wizard, you're supposed to be mainly utility. You have the most skill points, or tied, in not barring the bard. You have enough skill points to have a lot of different prowess and oh, I can open this wall with engineering. I can activate this altar with arcana. I can figure out this guy's spell with occultism. And the barbarian couldn't do that. What the barbarian could do is swing his axe as hard as he possibly can and open up the doorway. Put a frog in front of it. I felt like no matter where you were, they would each have their own uses and they would still be relevant. It's just in different ways. It took us three spellcasters and the spellcaster barbarian to summon the elementals to build the bridge in our campaign. But there's still a need for anybody else because we've gotten ambushed at high levels too. It's important to have fighters. And without the spellcasters, well, you have fighters, but you don't have a direction and a drive to go places. So I think they matter in different regards, but they both matter a lot more than, in my opinion, 5e, where it's like, well, the fighter is here, the wizard throws fireballs, 20 of them a turn. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I personally consider that kind of for me a personal win of like you should both like if the fighter goes I always feel like I've got something to do and there's a reason to have the wizard along at low levels and at high levels and then the wizard's like I always have something to do and there's a reason to have the fighter along at low levels and high levels. You're really winning there in the perspective of always feeling you can contribute because and this was something that was talked about. I mean, even in the 70s, about how once a wizard got to a certain level of strength, they would warp the whole campaign around them. And it does work like that to a smaller degree in All Might Die because your just access to the toolbox gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you can sort of attack a problem from a lot more angles than your fighter, than your martial class can. But we are now fighting something. We need someone with sword to be in the front line. That never goes away. Like that's never a thing that you're like, oh, we don't need that anymore. We've leveled up past the point where we need someone with the sword to hold the line. That never really happens. Now, BSD also had one other thing where he would ask, like, I'm assuming it's viable to roll for the cost of each component so you can randomize the values for the year. You can do that. Now, that being said, the default assumptions of the way that the rulebook is designed are going to assume you don't do that. And there's a reason why. The reason why is because how you're generating those values is at the end of a questionnaire where you as the GM that wants to make this campaign, you you shouldn't be expected to know every single rule before you start world building or before you start running the campaign. You should be able to explore as you go along and to kind of enjoy the discovery of the system and the world and things like that. So the World Architect, which is the first little booklet of the game system, when you go through World Architect, it'll ask you, oh, what sorts of things do you like? Do you like this? Put these in these orders, things like this, and it'll generate you. If you're using, we have a web app that is going to be released with the game as well. You've used the web app, it'll spit out like, hey, this is what we think the default values should be. Or if you're using the little questionnaire in the booklet, it'll say, well, this is, if you think it should be harder to create than destroy, then you should put destruction as lower level than creation, right? So it'll create you sort of a ranking system that you can go to the end. And you can also then ignore or change or do whatever you want to with it. But the goal is that to give you guidance to be able to say, oh, this should be what's going on, because there's a lot more toggles, right? If you have, it's entirely possible to make a year where between all 18 words, there are no zeros. So there's no first level spells. That is a very different feel from the default assumption of like a middle year in an age where we assume that there are six of the 18 words are zero, right? That's going to mean that magic is fairly easy. You could, if you really wanted to, you could make, what would the max value be? So it'd be 9. So you can make 9 of the words zero, and that means all the other ones are ones. So you can have basically, you could start off with half of your spells be level 1 if you wanted to have a year where magic was everywhere. But it's the idea of not just, oh, I'm going to roll some dice and then get a thing and then try to use it. You can. But I think for a lot of GMs, it's going to feel a little bit better to have a system that says, okay, here's how you create that thing. Here's what it means. And when you change those toggles, this is what it's going to do. So you can really feel like you're involved in the process of building your campaign. And kind of to that note, the Age of the Oak being a year 1 game, so you have ages, right? The ages of the world, which are in blocks of 7 years. The closer to the beginning of an age you get, the less information they have, the less culture they have, the less the fewer things have survived from the last time that magic existed. So their starting point is lower. And in this world, that is going to mean that there's very few things unlocked in the campaign because we're playing at a year 1 campaign, whereas campaign 5 was a year 5 campaign. It was 5 out of 7 years had elapsed in the age. So the age was going to be ending in a couple of more years. So they had a ton of knowledge that they had gathered from the first 4 years of the age that had not been lost, right? Because when you go between ages, there's a big time gap where there's no living mouse that is alive at the end of an age that is then alive at the beginning of the next age, right? There's a complete culture gap for the mice between there, whereas between individual years and an age, there are a lot of mice that were alive when magic died in the fall that are alive when magic comes back alive in the spring, that can then connect the dots and they can have a start point to rebuild from. So in the Age of the Oak this summer, that means they're starting from almost nothing. And what we'll be doing in the lead up for the campaign, we'll be discussing what is in the cache left behind from the last age. So there is going to be this little time capsule, this little nugget left behind that is going to be the seed for the whole culture, for the whole campaign itself, which is also going to involve like when certain people want to be invested in what classes they're bringing with them and that sort of stuff, that they have those there. And then in that line, we talked about this a little bit before the stream, but I didn't get to hear the answer of what it was going to be. Is Harlan, you're one of the people that played a ton in campaign 5. Do you think you're going to be playing in campaign 6 this summer?
I would really love to. I hope I'm able to. But I'm kind of in between stages right now for my life. So I've applied to some really rigorous programs for next year, where I actually get to move to New York. I will do a lot more things, and I might not have time for All My Sty. If either they don't fall through or I decide not to go through with it, this is probably one of the staples of things that I really want to pursue. And depending on when the campaign starts, I'll be around for the start of it, but I'm not totally sure if I'm going to be in the campaign in the same role as an adventuring house towards the end. So I know there's different levels of play. If I do end up going into a stage where I don't have time to do what I did in campaign 5, which is play every single day and message PDM every hour asking for more games, then maybe I can be a regional house, or I can be one of the different levels of play that doesn't require as much of my time. But I'd love to. We just kind of got to see where the cards fall.
Well, I really would look forward to having you back at the table. It was a ton of fun being a jam for you. And I did want to, I said way earlier in the stream, hey, I'm going to put a pin on something you said. And I do want to come all the way back to that and say, first of all, you don't have to play every day. But we did have, 4 sessions a week, 5 sessions a week, a lot of times. So you had the ability to play a lot. And from the GM side of things, the only reason that works is because the system has a lot of pieces for me to be able to run on the fly. I do not have to prep a bunch of stuff, because if I had to prep things and run 4 sessions a week, I just couldn't. I would not be able to function. I have to have other things that are not All My Sty happening in my life. I've got 3 kids. I've got a wife. I've got other things that I need to do. I was writing the system while also running those games. No way I could do it if the system was prep intensive. So there's that. You could just play once a week or once every other week, like a lot of people in the campaign, and you're not going to be. You'd still be able to do a lot of stuff, right? Corey playing Giles. He didn't have a lot of other characters that were mid-level, right? He had Giles, and then he had one character who was level 3. But he was still able to be one of the icons, and he played mostly once a week. So you could definitely still be involved even if you have lesser time. But the thing I wanted to touch on was, you had said that you played in All My Sty, but the only other games that you played in were ones that were from the community. And this is something that I think is very interesting. I'm curious if you, as a relatively new player to tabletop, can kind of understand to a certain degree how unusual it is to have nested campaigns in a play group. Normally, if you're playing in a game, a lot of times for an individual group, they kind of fall into a role, and they will have a game night where they will play. Hey, we play every Friday. And even if you have a group like my old group where, it wasn't assumed that the same person was the GM every time, you'd rotate through GMs and rotate through systems, but you didn't really have a lot of other games that spun off to do other things. But in a West Marches campaign, the community is first, right? You said a minute, hey, I'm messaging him every hour to talk about stuff. The Discord had tens of thousands of messages on it over the course of the campaign, because people were planning, people were talking, people were logging on to just chat about stuff and to theorize and talk about mysteries and share interesting things that they had found on the campaign, or hypothesize about what they might be able to do, or plan what their next adventure was going to be. And that community element is so good, because what it means is when you're part of a community like that, you find people who are yeah, these are fun people to do stuff with. And what ends up happening is you go, hey, I want to play, or I want to run, or I have something I want to do, where I might have another spot at a table, and it's someone dropped from our campaign, and we're playing Dolmenwood, and we don't have anyone else to join in. That can be kind of daunting. But if you're in a West Marches community, it's not, right? You can just say, oh, my Friday Dolmenwood campaign is missing a person. Hey GM, I'm in this campaign with 120 other people, and 15 of those people I really, really like. I can tolerate a lot of them, but 15 of them are like really cool people. I think they would be good fits for this campaign. And so you have this community of people that you like playing with, that you like interacting with, that you can constantly pull in. And so these other games end up getting spun off of this bigger community. Did that seem normal to you as a player? Is that just, that's how it happened, or?
I would say that's almost as it happened. I have no real basis to go off of. I knew that there were groups or there were servers or whatnot that were these massive, like, all call, post a forum if you want people, this for D&D, here's some chat groups. But I never really thought I'd be, in one of the bigger ones or one of the smaller ones. And, Dice Mice was called, All Mice Die, like the server and the community were not what I was expecting, what were pleasantly accepted. I got into 2 different campaigns that I personally couldn't keep going with. And I, one of the people in the campaign I was able to reach out to, and, they've helped me with some of like the applications to things that I want to do IRL that have nothing to do with TTRPGs, but just having the friend who's like, hey man, I've done that before. If you have questions, I'm here. Like, that's been very helpful. It's a lot more community building than the few other campaigns that I have been on.
Yeah, and that is something that's powerful. One of the things that you guys talked about, I'm a big fan of D&D 4th edition, and as someone who's younger and is newer into the TTRPG community, it is hard to overstate 10 years ago the amount of vitriol of people in certain areas of the internet towards 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It was pretty bad. And one of the main complaints, one of the main things that people were upset about 4E is because a lot of people thought this was the company that made D&D. This is Wizards of the Coast saying, we're going to make an MMO. Now, I personally don't think there's a lot of massive multiplayer online parts of D&D 4E. But that being said, that was one of the big problems. And for me, it was always curious to have that be a downside, because I have lifelong friendships that I made from MMOs, right? That I used to play World of Warcraft for quite a while. I played EverQuest for a bit. And, there are people that I have been lifelong friends with, and we've done all kinds of things that had absolutely nothing to do with World of Warcraft. I recently, this past summer, I went to Canada. I went to a different country and spent a good chunk of time hanging out with people that I met in a random dungeon in World of Warcraft, right? And like got to be introduced to their family, and we chilled and hung out with them. I've gone and spent some time with them. And it's one of those things that when, people talk about like, why would you be in a West Marches campaign? It's hard to explain that, like, if you're going to be doing something, you're going to be doing this group activity with other people. Yeah, it's going to be fun to have that activity with them. But no matter, like, unless you're in a group that really doesn't fit you, right? No matter what you really do, if you just spend a ton of time with these people, even if you're mostly talking about game stuff, you're going to eventually talk about other stuff. You're going to joke. You're going to be friends. You're going to find out where, this person's from this area, or, this person has these other hobbies. You're going to be making friendships from this. They're going to outlive the campaign. They're going to outlive the community. And they might stick with you for years, might stick with you for the rest of your life. And it's just such a hard thing to kind of explain to people of like, well, why West Marches? Well, because I might play in a 5-man band style game where I'm going to be good friends with those people for the rest of my life. But in my experience, that's a real low % chance. A lot of games, you play like 1 or 2 sessions and then they evaporate, or you do like session 0 and then you never make it to session 1. Like that's like, in my experience, like 80% of the games that I am in as a player, I go to session 0 and we never really make it anywhere past that. Or, we play for, 1 to 3 sessions. There was a big industry poll that said that a lot of the campaigns were like 7 sessions or less for D&D. Like most campaigns were 7 sessions or less. And the idea that the campaign 5 All Might Die was 251 sessions, and I feel strongly, if I had not had an endpoint for myself, if I said, hey, we are going to be ending the campaign here, we would still be playing, right? Like we would be in session 400, but we would still be going strong, because we did not end the campaign because it fizzled out, or because the people didn't want to play with each other, or we were done being part of a community. We ended because the person who was running the campaign said, I need a break from not running from the campaign. I need a break from this is how campaign 5 operated, so I can take all the lessons that I've learned and write the finalized set of rules, so that when campaign 6 comes out, I'm not planning on having a hard endpoint. I'm not planning on saying campaign 6 is going to last for this amount of time. What I'm really, really hoping will happen is with campaign 6, we'll get to experience an entire in-world year of play. I'm very excited for that, and I see a couple people that have pinged in with stuff where BST is talking about. It was rough the early 4E days. Yeah, there's some people like Node. You got to. You joined in 4E and didn't realize that all the grognards were hating on it, which was great. It was a wonderful way to be like, man, this is fun, and not realize that there's people screaming at the clouds in the background, and having 4E just normal. And I do think like there were some elements of 4E that you can say are kind of MMO-esque. One of the core principles of 4E, which is very anti All Might Die, for the record, even as someone who loves 4E. 4E was designed with the idea that if Ferdinand plays at my table with his 4E character, he could leave my table and go play in Node's campaign with that same character and be able to sort of easily show where all of his stuff came from, and to have it be balanced, so that he didn't play in my campaign and I give him an item and he gets to Node's campaign and Node's like, absolutely not. That is some crazy homebrew bullshit. Like, what are you doing? No, where all of the items in 4th edition had levels associated with them, had rarity associated with them. So you could say, oh, you can only have like 2 rare items, and you can't have any items that are more than like your level +2 or something like that. Where it gave you the tools, right, to be able to easily bound a character, with the idea that you could more easily take it between tables and play under different DMs. And that had a little bit of the MMO aspect to it, because the inherent modularity of it. And then Note says, for me, West Marches scratches the same itch that being in a good raiding guild and WoW did. Yes, 100% that. And by the same thing, in being in a good raiding guild and WoW, you had an activity that you did together, right? You raided and did stuff, and that was sort of the game night thing. But there was so much stuff that you did outside of raid night. You'd play and get your consumables, or you do dungeons, or you just sit in bullshit in Ventrilo or Mumble or Skype chat or Discord, depending on how old you are. And that idea, right, of the community element is why it had such staying power. And that's why West Marches has such staying power. And so Node said, like, yeah, if I hadn't forced it in, we'd still be paying. And Bartleby and Glarb had outstanding targets on their back. Yeah, so Bartleby is up here in the stream. You can see this is Baron Bartleby, the Weasel Lord. And the online group, so Ferdinand and his group had a lot more to do with the Weasels than Giles and their group did, and a lot more to do with Glarb. I don't know if I've showed you the artwork yet for Glarb. So. But his art looks really good. I'm really excited for being able to put stuff in there and have fun stuff for Glarb.
I am convinced that if the Soul Catcher or this other character didn't come into the last fight, either the entire online iconic party would have been wiped out, or Bartleby would have died. Like, that was the only 2 outcomes. And then we realized, well, shit, this guy's come in the party. What is he doing? Oh, still fun though. Still a great fight. So.
Yeah, it had some interesting iconic sort of fights. And one of the things that was important for me, as someone who was I've done a lot of MMO stuff. I've played in a ton of other games. I said this recently to somebody else who had a minor stroke when I said the sentence. But 3 years ago, I ran 111 systems in a 1 year period of time. So like I intentionally went out of my way to find groups, to prep for random groups, to run online. So I ran everything from like Into the Odd to I pulled up some old Vampire the Masquerade stuff. I didn't run 5e, but I ran like 4 editions of Dungeons and Dragons. I sort of forced myself to run tons and tons and tons of different things. And that experience for me of like, oh, I have to run all of these different things and I have to play all of this different stuff and I have to learn all of these different elements to be able to quickly run and be able to quickly to do that in a short period of time gave me the tools that I would need to build this campaign up. And part of the reason that ended up sort of stabilizing me is I found that any of the games where I could find a way to have the system support having a cool epic fight, even if that fight wasn't at low level, even if it needed to be like a high level thing, those are the systems that I really felt compelled to keep reading, right? I wanted the dramatic moment. It didn't even have to be super heavy rules. There's a system called Fabula Ultima, which has real loosey-goosey, fluffy bullshit time style rules, right? Where the rules are very basically you're making an anime, and I was like, oh, I will actually read a big chunk of this system because I can find a way from the way the system is to support me having a cool epic fight. And one of my successes with All My Sty was getting to the end of the campaign of running some of the monsters and being like, this is genuinely fun to run. And that Soul Catcher battle that was like the last battle of the campaign, that was so fun. I rebuilt the entire monster system so that every monster I run like Soul Catcher now, because it was just so fun to run. I was like, wow, I'm 250 sessions into this campaign, and I've just found the way that I've been running monsters this whole time could have been so much more fun the whole way through. So I'm really looking forward to being able to get other people behind the DM screen, to be able to have other people running things, to be able to play with the monster creation and the monster running system, so that you do feel like you always have something fun and epic to do.
Still surprised that I don't think anybody officially died in the Soul Catcher fight beyond the singular scare. Like, I'm very. We had someone, I think, the Bard was level 4 or something. Like, they were a brand new addition to the party, and it was fun.
Fine is a strong word. I mean, you did have someone who died on the way home because.
But he wanted to die. He's been chasing that high since the start of the campaign. All right, he was already basically invisible for half the time I saw him. Anyways, like, he just create a bottle cap would break, and I didn't see him for the next hour. Like, he wanted what happened. Yeah, he let himself die.
So yeah, so one of the other conversations, which will probably be likely the last of the icons that I talk to, is going to be talking to Node, who played Nidal the Barbarian, who at the very end of the campaign became the iconic Revenant. He was trying to sort of chase that, just like Ferdinand said, trying to chase that idea of, he knew that this undead class existed. He knew that there was a way to go down this avenue, and he sort of finally crossed the threshold at the very end of the campaign, and wasn't able to actually play the Revenant. So that stream will be a little bit more of a, hey, here, I'm going to put the screen, here is the Revenant class on the screen, and then we're going to go through and sort of explain, because all of the icons will be able to play their class. I know you had said you had listened to the fighter stream last night. Did you hear what the plan is for, if you decide to play as a icon, but but the wizard is one of the base classes, right? Do you know what you're going to be doing, or what you get for being the wizard icon?
I believe so. It's double the starting mice, and they're Battleborn, correct?
Correct. Yeah, the Battleborn
I'm
mice.
interested. I
It'll,
saw five, one batch made, so I'm very interested to see more of what you can roll on that table and what there is to see in Battleborn.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I do think that, again, these sort of side elements, which are, for me as a game designer, it's really hard for me to know how to pitch my campaign and pitch my game to people. Actually, I'm better at pitching the campaign. It's bad for me to pitch the game because it's like, well, it's got OSR elements, but it also has skill systems. So there's all these different rules. And I've heard people tell me with a straight face, your system can't be OSR because you have skills and skill points. And in the same group, literally the same playtest group, I've had the same person, not the same person, but a different person say, this game must be OSR because you can die in a single hit, and that's just part of the thing. You roll up 5 characters and you keep 3 of them, and that style of thing, it says, oh no, this is definitely OSR. You can't pick your class, right? And again, it's so hard to find what definitions that people have. But I do, when if I can get people to sort of let me talk to them about the campaign and the game for a little bit longer, I do like to talk about what sort of unique stuff happens and the sort of unique culture around being Battleborn and having these like noble families like matchmaking and then figuring out how to like go on adventure with their mice and like find out, all right, so the mouse will be pregnant for this amount of time, so we need to adventure in this window, and like, oh, the husband doesn't have to go along, or the father of the Battleborn doesn't have to go along, but they're going to give them, I can't play on that day, me as a player, I can't play on that day, but the mother of my children is going to be going on adventure, so my house is going to donate. They had an instance where someone donated like a whole bunch of scrolls and potions and a set of magic armor, right? Where it's like, and I think one of the other people gave a magic shield to the person who was the mouse that was doing the Battleborn challenge. And like having this thing of like, it is this uniquely community element that still feels like there is that like noble family, right? That sort of arranged marriage style. We're continuing the bloodline. We're trying to do this thing, but it is this sort of narrative fun and logistical nonsense that I have to say, like, I have not played in any. I've played in a lot of games. I've run a lot of systems and I've played in a lot of campaigns. This is the first campaign that I've ever played in where the players were like, okay, we're gonna matchmake for people in our houses, and we had an instance where one of the players, I don't think these two players ever played in the same session. I don't think Dakota, who played the iconic brawler, and Bo, who played the iconic sorcerer, I do not believe those two players ever played in the same session together. They may have, but I don't think so. But there was an instance. They did play once? Okay. So they played together once, and then, but out of the blue, Bo gets a message from Dakota, where Dakota's like, hey, we should make babies. And there's just like, no, what is wrong with you? was just beautiful. And it would be, it's hard to explain it in a way where it's like, but it wasn't actually weird. Like, it wasn't a problem. It was just something that was fun and interesting to do.
It'd be very difficult. We're going to roll these mice. They're all going to be unique in their own way. They'll be Battleborn. With how cruel and unforgiving level 1 gameplay is. Come on, man. You do this to all of us.
Well, I mean, it does. And it's one of those things, right? Because it is so easy to die at low levels. And, BSD said this about second edition having skills as well. And second edition also had a thing where it was very easy to die. And low levels were sort of a crucible that you had to survive through. But back then, and even in older style, the idea that like basically combat is a failure state was not every table, but it was something that happened a lot, where it's like, oh, if we're actually rolling initiative, even in the systems that didn't use rolling initiative, but like if we're actually fighting in combat, something has probably gone wrong, because we want to avoid that thing. But in All Mice Die, that's not the only way to progress. One of the big reasons that I wanted to have a system like the heroic deed system was so that you would be able to retain something from what could be kind of a meat grinder. And what was really interesting, and I don't know if you know this, Ferdinand, but like the people who played in the in-person group had very few magic items at the beginning of the campaign.
We kept throwing our mice into the meat grinder and turning them into magic items for the next generation to use. And eventually, we had so many magic items that the low-level mice just didn't die because they had so many magic items to carry them through the crucible.
Which was really interesting because, you know, it wasn't that the in-person group was not doing cool and heroic things. Risking yourselves and having these dramatic moments and stuff, they just happen a lot more often in combat. They're more dramatic when people die and pass on these things. And the sort of two methods of play of like, okay, we can die really easily, so we're going to be super ultra careful all the time, so we can survive to high levels. And the other group that says we can die super easily, but we're playing a roguelike. So we also breed really fast. So if we just throw them in, some of them will get lucky and survive. And the ones that don't get lucky and survive, as long as we get to keep their magic item, right? As long as the family gets to inherit. What was his name? Not Glenn. Glenn's the wrong name. The Buck's first character that died. Do you remember his name? Curry.
Curry.
Yeah. So, you know, as long as we are able to get Curry's grace, as long as we can get the sword that is created by this character who died on their first outing into the dungeon, as long as the house can keep that and then use that for later mice to eventually, you know, make it to high level, we're going to get high level mice anyways. It's just, it's two very different perspectives, and it was fun to have both work.
Yeah. There's so many cool moments from that where it's like, okay, I died, but I did get this really cool magic sword. You know, it's like, that was, there is that spark of low-level play of, oh, my fourth Wyatt died, but I did get some cool magic gloves, so I guess there's that, you know, that's pretty, although I guess the people who are, you know, yeah, I think I might, there's not as many online people, I think, who got to an iconic base class. Well, regardless, the people who are the Battleborn would be like, hey guys, let's maybe not do the same mentality we had last time, even though it worked, you know. That'll be fun, to try a different style of not throwing our mice into the meat grinders. You know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to it. And, you know, I didn't really do anything to promote either version of how to play. Nor did I sort of like insult or like say that they were doing anything wrong for either version of play. So I was pretty like, oh, let's see if both of these work. And it was really fun for me to be like, no, both of these groups are having fun playing very differently. And, you know, it was interesting to me that some of the stories and some of the things that happened that were talked about very frequently were the aberrations from the different groups, right? So like the in-person group, because they were very combat averse, the combats they got to at low level became some of the things that they talked about all the time, because they were the abnormal thing that occurred. And so, you know, after we talked about this yesterday, when Corey's character, when Giles was able to kill the Hawk Wraith, that was like a big moment for them, and they talked about it for quite a while. And they had a bunch of other stuff that they were doing, exploring the dungeon and doing all these other things. But for a while, they talked about that moment because it was such a break from the norm. And then for the online characters, their break from the norm was a door. It was the door that almost killed Harland at the very beginning of the campaign. Where
first session too.
Where the players, they were in this big dungeon, and in this system, you know, when you get gold for your family, you get wealth for your house. That is how you get experience, right? You get the goods, you get them home, you get the money and power and influence for your family. That is how you level up. And so they're in the dungeon, and they're like, we don't want to fight anything. We can if we have to. And they look and they find this beautiful door, and they're like, we don't actually care what's on the other side of the door. We're pretty certain if we can find a way to get this giant door out of the dungeon, it'll pay for, like, we will all level up, right? Like, so the entire thing is not we're going to go into the dungeon, we can find our way through the door. The entire session, I think more than one session. You guys went back to try to, yeah. So 2 sessions of the game were extracting this door from the dungeon to go back and melt it down for the silver, and that ended up being one of the big things that got talked about all the time in the online campaign, because it was this puzzle that was a little bit different from the way the online group tended to handle things.
I did want to ask a question. One of the experiences I had playing kind of the high-level wizard that I don't think many other people had, because even me and Tisha, whilst we were both playing high-level wizards, had different experiences casting things, because my go-to plan was at the beginning of the session, I pull out a call, hey guys, who wants this shield spell? Right? And I just cast without scrolls, and I cast so many times because you have the willpower granted to you by being a wizard. Tisha never, or at least to my knowledge, didn't do as much because it wasn't really a thing to her. In the late levels of the campaign, one thing I kind of felt was, oh, I reached level 9 and 11, I got a cool new ability. You know, the Brawler can now punch again, which he does more damage. You know, the Barbarian can do more damage with Skull Taker, and Emmett can make people elementally
vulnerable.
Resistant. Vulnerable, there you go. It's like, I can make my spells using willpower. I can make a scroll into a scroll of the same field that also has to be the same level and lower. Kind of felt like I could do that, and if I really needed to cast in the Veil, or I really for some reason needed the specific master component, it almost wasn't worth it because it wasn't willpower efficient. And crafting the scrolls with the addition of the inventory system, it became too much of a, you need to spend an exorbitant amount of downtime to do this. Mm-hmm. And like, I had a lot of other characters that were high level. I think I had another Paragon, I had another Heroic Mouse. To reach level 12 was 57,000, I have in front of me, 57,200 XP. It's 1 gold, like 1 gold is 1 XP for most characters, barring circumstances. So by the end of the campaign, we had 57,200 gold from that one character. And it's a lot of gold to use, but it's also like, why would I make the scrolls kind of deal? Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping with the way the new magic system is, I almost guarantee it, because it's like, if crafting the scrolls now grants the wizard, oh yeah, you could cast it without, but you can also cast a completely different spell if you craft the scroll first. I think that's a better addition from the last campaign, because it gives you more incentive as a wizard to not just, oh, we don't need scrolls. It's, well, yeah, we don't need scrolls, but you can have a bunch of different spell combinations if you make them. So I think that's a better change to Scribe, at least. You're talking about cost. I was like, that's something I forgot about. But
yeah, and you know, that experience is one of the reasons why that ability got moved, right? That was a level 9 ability that was removed, and one of the main uses of it was folded into being your level 2 ability, right? Because it wasn't as impactful as some of the other things, right? The fighter being able to, you know, the iconic fighter was dual wielding 2-handed weapons, right? He had two-handed axes that he was dual wielding. That was incredibly impactful, being able to wield a weapon, a 2-handed weapon in each hand. You mentioned like the Skull Taker for Barbarian. There were different rages for the Barbarian, and Skull Taker was strong, but I don't actually I don't remember if Node even used that one. I think one of the ones that
Beetle.
Yeah, Battle Beetle got used more often. But it was this thing where, like, yeah, the idea of you being able to transmute all of your spells into other spells, so you have this more open spell book concept. That was the goal, right? To give you this big boost of versatility, but it didn't play out that way, and I had no way of knowing. Like, maybe a better designer than me could have been like, oh yeah, that's never going to work. we needed to play. We needed to have an iconic wizard. I needed to see Harland, and I needed to see how you were using things to be able to say, okay, that is not working as I intended. I now need to change that for how the rules actually work. Or, some other things being like, yeah, no, that actually did work as I intended, and that did work as I wanted it to. And so, I talked to, there's a couple of playtesting groups and people that I talked to about playtesting when I'm like, my playtest was not just a playtest, it was a playtest campaign. Because the only real way to playtest a game that is designed to be West March's first is to play it at scale. We did have 4 other campaigns that were prior to the big campaign. So obviously campaign 5 was the 5th campaign, and none of those played at scale. Right. And so there were a lot of basics, a lot of elements that we could get, but things like the new way the influence system works, we needed to have people play and people tinker with it, and people have access to all the different buildings and see what gets used and see what doesn't get used. Right. Some of the things that I spent a ton of time on designing that got very little use, but were still useful. Things like the gym, having something where you can train with somebody else to be better at lifting these heavy objects and being able to kind of give your character another avenue. It was used quite frequently, but it wasn't flashy. It's like, oh, cool. This I spent a lot of design time on this, and then it was used and it felt correct. Like, it didn't feel too powerful. It didn't feel too weak. It felt like right where it needed to be. It came up every now and again. People could feel like they could get this benefit and be good to go. And then other ones that I looked at and I was like, oh man, I wrote up in like 5 minutes the Skulk's hideout. Where you could make treasure maps. It was a throwaway thing of like, I don't have anything I really want to do for this. I'm going to put this in here. And then holy shit, that building got a lot of use.
Every single day.
Yeah. So, it was like people being like, man, this is amazing. I'm being like, okay, well, I need to spend more design time on how that works and how that plays in.
Then one of the maps that came from that was like, at least for me, like, that resulted in one of the gold coins that my character got, which then led me to get an item that made it to where I didn't die in the final fight. Like, it compounds so much just from being the singular 5-minute throwaway idea. So I understand the play testing and stuff. I think it's a good change for the wizard. I like the magic system as I'm hearing it more than I experienced it. Just as I know it's going to be a lot more versatile, and it's a lot more, there's more spells than you can think of. Whereas in the old system, you can kind of guess there's a elemental bolt or a summon minor elemental. There's an elemental, 2 bolts, and there's a summon greater elemental. So I enjoy that a lot more. I think that's a good idea. You mentioned that you removed the ability from level 9 and you folded some parts of it into level 2. What's the new level 9 ability?
So the new level 9 ability, so the old one was that let you transmute the scroll. So that got folded into the scribe. So the new level 9 ability would take a little bit longer than we probably have left in the stream to be able to explain. But the short version is that so I'll explain sort of the theory behind why this thing exists real quick, which is one of the things that I really liked was when you guys as characters would have buffs or have other sorts of abilities that you used, that you're like, okay, we have this amount of time, right? We're going to use this thing and it'll last for, 4 hours, right? It'll last for 8 dungeon turns, and we now have this sort of ability to rely on. But those things felt very static, which was nice for being able to rely on them. But it didn't lead to a lot of dramatic moments where you had choices of whether to try to continue to use something. And instances where there were spells and abilities where there was an inflection point where you had to dramatically choose to keep going or to put more power into it, those were the ones that felt more fun. They felt more dramatic. So things like Hold Person or Hold Monster, where when you hold on to them, you then had to have this battle of wills, this little mini game. If it was instead, they're held for 1d6 turns, they didn't feel as impactful. It didn't feel as fun to interact with. And so when I thought about that, and I thought about, okay, well, I want to kind of play around with this, and we built in the monster recovery system where, in campaign 5, let's say a creature was, you lit somebody on fire, right? A monster is now on fire. They're going to take fire damage, whenever they start or end their turn or whatever it is, until they can put the fire out, and they can do things to try to make recoveries. With the idea of putting everything on the player side, the new rules show you what the recovery is, and then the player just has to beat it. And the monster can do things where they can make it a harder and harder roll, right? Where, say, the recovery for the monster is 9, that means the player, in order to keep that effect on the monster, has to roll 2d6 and get a 9 or better. Where the monster can take actions and say, all right, well, now it's an 11 or it's a 12. You've got to roll 2 6s, or you have to have some sort of bonus to it in order to keep the effect on him. And then I was like, well, that should also impact spells. And so rather than spells having a static duration, spells have sustain. And so you can keep a spell going for a certain amount of time, and then at the end of that time, you have to make checks, and the checks get harder and harder. So you might be able to keep your sound swallowing. You might be able to keep your sound swallowing going for a lot longer than one dungeon turn, but you have to sustain it. It gets harder to sustain, and you might have to recast it. And so the level 9 wizard ability is built around the idea of sustaining your spells and being able to drastically increase your chances to sustain spells and to basically keep them going for longer periods of time, so you can get more bang for your buck from each individual spell cast. Because that's kind of the idea of the wizard, is that they're the magical workhorse, right? So your low level things give you access to more utility options as spells. You have that temporary willpower so that you can cast more dangerous spells without it killing you. And then at higher levels, then you can keep that spell just sort of running and running and running, and where other characters, they don't get to express their expertise with the magic quite the same way, because they might have to recast, where the wizard can say, no, I'm going to keep this going. So their level 9 ability is built around the sustain of their spells.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so BSD says, what do you mean I can craft treasure maps? Get out of my way, I got to go learn cartography. Yes. So in a West Marches game, one of the core concepts is that game happens when there is a goal, and then you pursue that goal, right? So the players have to say, this is what we want to do. And then we have these group of players. Hey, DM, can you run this goal that we have with this group of people on Tuesday, right? We can match the goal with the players. You say to the DM, hey, we've done all this stuff. So the person who's running the game doesn't have to herd all the cats to get the game to work. They just have to say, this is what my availability is, and then let the players' interests and drives kind of drive them. But what it also means is that sometimes people don't have stuff that they really specifically want to do, and you need a sort of a system, which in my original writing of things, the building I actually spent a lot of time on was the tavern. So the original Skulk's hideout was the tavern, and it was going to be the idea that is very prevalent in a lot of OSR games of rumors, right? Being able to go to the tavern and spend downtime to collect rumors about things that are going off in the world. And I didn't hate that idea, but it didn't feel as interesting to me. It didn't feel as exploration focused as the system, right? The whole idea of All My Sty is that exploration is the primary pillar of play. And going and just sitting in the bar and chatting with people was cool and everything, but it didn't tie into exploration as heavily as this idea of having characters who would sort of sneak out at night to go and explore on their own and then come back and kind of whisper in the dark tavern. So you still have this tavern feel of the back room where everyone's talking about sort of the cool night adventures or the cool shit that they did on the side. But the focus is on, hey, we have this lead, we have this rumor that is in this specific place, and that the vibe is a little different because it's just a rumor mill, but the exploration is the front part of it, rather than the rumors and chatting is the start point, and then you go and explore.
Keep Rocky following us. Yep.
I will say, So I've got to get going here. So for some, as some of you guys might know, I have a new son who's less than a month old who is horribly abused because his parents are not always, at his beck and call at all times. So I do need to go do that here pretty soon. But one last thing that I wanted to do, and this might be a controversial way to sort of end this, and I don't know if we've talked about this before, Ferd.
No.
But because of the way the magic system works, the new one of the things that happened is when we started making the spell list, when we started seeing what was going to be in all the slots, what sort of spells we had from the previous campaign that would make it over, that wouldn't make it over, what new spells had to be made, there was a couple of casualties, I guess, of the transition. One of which I don't think you're going to be super sad about, which is elemental barrage and elemental bolt. Basically, all of those are gone. You can still do those things, but it's not But one of the ideas, right, is elemental bolt is a spell that let you pick an element and then go do a thing. Well, with the way that the new system works, that pick an element part happens like when you go and make the spell. It doesn't happen when you cast. So your elemental bolt is still a thing, but it's broken into so many places. But what we also found out is because of the way the sort of verb and manifestation system worked, it meant that you couldn't have, kind of someone said earlier, the sort of creation scroll, right? You can't have multiple verbs in the same spell. So I was going to ask your take on us finding out that you cannot have a spell that creates an undead and controls them. You pick one.
I think it's great. One thing I think the undead is a great idea in concept, and practice is very difficult to work with, is unlike when I resurrected, like, a horde of corpses, people were just bringing corpses back to the county, so, Harland's gonna resurrect him on the next time he leaves. That's great in practice,
Resurrect.
But to take them out and then run them is just a lot more clunky, it felt like. And it's like, yeah, I could bring some frog skirmishers, but they're really just gonna be more of they're annoyance than they are gonna be helpful, so they didn't end up getting used. So besides the narrative undead army of all these mice, I didn't think they were as beneficial. But if you separate the two spells, where it's like, ooh, look, a graveyard, resurrect, all right, we gotta go, guys, let's leave. Or it's like, ooh, look, some undead that death is trying to control. Those are mine now. Screw you. Like, that's all. I think that honestly is more fun. Even though I was known as the necromancer for some reason, even though I never did that.
Some reason.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I talked to somebody else about this about the sort of diegetic play, right? The idea that emergent play, right? What you do, what you're going to do is what happens in game, and the stuff that you have is diegetic, means that it came from the game, right? So you don't have a plan going, and you don't have a build. You can't really build like I have a character build ahead of time. You can have some goals, but you can't really have a character build ahead of time. And then you pursue those goals and you try to go through. But then at the other end, like, that might not match up. If memory serves, I don't think Harland was into necromancy at all at the beginning. I think you were planning on being like a divination wizard, right? Wasn't that the?
Yeah, something like that. I think that was that, or like Arcana, because I really liked the shield spell, and I was like, that's what I wanted to.
Yeah, because I think when you initially were telling me about what you're going to do for your wizard, it was like, oh, I'm gonna go into divination, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'll see how that goes. And then I don't know if you ever, like, you cast maybe one divination spell the whole game,
yeah.
Where it was, yeah. and that ended up being the thing where it was like it's just not how it played out, and it's not just for spellcasters, right? It's for everybody. I know I'll let you say something first, because it sounded like you had a thought, and then I'll say my little spiel about diegetic play.
I remember the divination we cast, and it was in the same session that, well, it was the session before we found Yunder. It was a session that led us to the wall, to dig out the wall, find the frogs, and be like, put a pin in that, we're gonna come back. We came back, and then it's like, yeah, we don't got this, and then we go screwing around with a different altar. I do have two questions before you go. We can do it after your spiel, though.
So one of the things that is important, right, is in in any sort of play where there's variant levels, right? We talked about this a little bit, but it should be said explicitly, right? He said, hey, in one of the last big battles, there was a level 4 bard who was way lower than everybody else. Everybody else was in the like 9-10 range. I think the demiurge was like 7 or something, but like everybody else was fairly higher level. And the idea that there are these level gaps, it can sometimes be frustrating. And one of the things that I noticed is some of the older school play and some of the West Marches games that I was in. If you have a high level character along, it can feel terrible as the level 1, right? As the new player of like, oh, we don't really get to do anything. We don't serve a purpose really, because the high level, if I'm playing a fighter and we bring a high level fighter along, they're me, but better in every way. And one of the things that I was like, oh, this might be an interesting way to present this. And then as soon as I saw people's reaction to it, I was like, no, I need to double and triple down on this idea of the character being, when you get done with character creation, you have a character, but you're missing one of the big component elements to them, which is their skills. You know how many skill points you have, but you don't spend your skills in All Might Die until you use them. So that means that you're never going to make a character that, say, you decide is going to be a history specialist, and you put your points in history and you play in the game and you never make a history check. That can't happen from the way that the game is structured. When you go to make that first history check on that character, it'll be that moment where you say, oh, do I think this character is good in history? And then you spend your points, and then you might not need to make a check. You might automatically get some of the information because of, if you get training and it's a trained check in All Might Die, if you have the level of expertise that is needed for whatever the task is, you just succeed. And it's only when you're trying to go something that's kind of a little bit beyond your kin, right? You're trained, but you're trying to do an expert level task. Okay, but now this is where the dice gets involved to be able to attempt to do something a little bit more skilled than maybe you're confident in. And that element of, oh, I don't have a build that I can go for and then execute at the table, right? Because I think Harland, if you were playing in like a 4E game and you're like, hey, I want to make or playing in a 5E game even, I want to make a divination specialist wizard, you could pick up the divination specialty as like your class feature. You could pick up the divination spells. You could do all the things that would sort of dictate that you were actually a divination specialist. Whereas in a game like All Might Die, where you are figuring out who you are as you go along, you go and you say, hey, I'm going to be a divination specialist. And then you're like, man, but this magic mouth spell is super useful if we flip it around and I can eat all the sound, or, light is very handy. I'm going to keep using light. And now I'm a master in light. And you'd be like, actually, what I thought I was going to do, and then what I actually did ended up being different, because you get to have this more back and forth interaction with the campaign world, right? It's not, I have this thing and then input it into the world. It's, I have these goals, but then they're going to be constantly in conversation with the world and with the game. And that's just, I don't know, it's so much more fun for me when I'm running, to be able to see people go, oh, this is what the plan's going to be. And I'm like, I wonder if that's going to have any correlation at all with what they actually do. Because sometimes it does, and sometimes it does not.
And sometimes it's the second gen fiend fight,
Yeah. And sometimes, you have this wonderful idea and you prepare. You get everything to where it should all be the way that it would be. And you just face plant that landing, and everybody dies.
Yeah. My only two questions were, my favorite spell towards the end of the campaign was Leyline. The second week ago, I was like, this is my favorite spell by far. Is that still a concept or a spell that would be included in the base game?
Yes. So Leyline, I'll let you know, is definitely a still a spell. It is a higher tier spell. And I will let you know that because of the keywords that you already know, right? You know that bind, instinct, and resonance are the sort of path of least resistance for magic, right? So those are the lowest level spells. A lot of one or more of those keywords is Leyline. So Leyline is not going to be as high of a level spell as it was in the campaign 5, because the spell levels in campaign 5 needed to reflect how powerful I wanted that magic to be and how powerful the spell should be, right? So if you look at a spell and you're like, oh, well, that spell's level 4 and that spell's level 2, you know, if I look at like the damage numbers, right, if they're both damaging spells, I kind of want to make the level 4 spell do a little bit more damage than the level 2 spell, because I want there to be some sort of balancing factor there. And I found that was somewhat frustrating and somewhat weird, where now when it's like, no, this is just what the spell is, and what level the spell happens to be, that's just whatever, that's just the expression of magic that year. So maybe it's really hard to cast a fireball, right? Maybe that's just really, really difficult, but maybe it's really easy to dominate person, right? It's really easy to mind control a person. So maybe we're gonna use mind control magic because that's easier this year. Whereas if you're using a leveled system, it's like, oh, well, dominate's gonna be a much higher level spell than fireball is. But that might not be how magic exists that year. Magic might exist in such a way that, yeah, that's true, or it might exist in such a way that, you know, the dominate, you know, the tier 3 dominate spell might be lower than the tier 2 fireball spell, right? Because, you know, the way that the numbers work, you're going to have certain spells that are higher than their tier, right? So you could have like the highest level tier 1 spell is going to be higher level than your lowest level tier 2 spell, just because of the way that the system works. So that sort of is going to push certain schools kind of to be more difficult to cast. And it also means that there's going to be some of the more difficult schools to cast that get pushed completely off the table, right? So you can't cast any spells that are beyond level 14. A level 15 spell is a mythic spell. You have to have a mythic level ability in order to cast a level 15 spell. That means that there's going to be spells that the players are going to understand really quickly. Oh, the tier 4 version of these types of words, they're going to be spells that are impossible to cast this year, or impossible for mice to cast without significant shenanigans. But that's going to be very like, we figure it out as we go along. We learn what these things are. We get to learn where the abilities are kind of in the overall tree of the spells.
And then my only other question, which is a pretty short one: when's the campaign starting? What is your estimate? You say it's the Kickstarter starts soon, so I'm guessing it's this year.
It's definitely this year, yeah. So the plan is that the Kickstarter is going to be early summer. Like I said, I just had my son. We're still getting into the groove of having 3 kids. There's a lot of other stuff going on, and I don't have the ability to pay a graphic designer. I have to work with what I have and share what profits we get from things with people in order to do it that way, which means I kind of have to go at the speed of whatever my fellow people that are working with me on the project can work at. But the goal is, if all goes well in puppies and rainbows mode, the goal is to have the Kickstarter be in May. And then at the end of the Kickstarter, we will do the intro for the campaign, which will be like the world building, all of the world architect stuff for the campaign in like June, and have the beginning of the campaign be late July, early August. What I would really like to have happen is have it be that we have the Kickstarter finish, we can get the Kickstarter printed and get it out to people, so that people can actually like get their hands on it and play some of the game and see what it's like, and then be able to say like, oh, as part of hey, I got this cool PDF with all these cool rules. It includes in it a link to the Discord. It includes with them, hey, you want to join the campaign? let's give you a way to play, right? And it's not just I have these rules, maybe I'll run them someday. It's, oh, I have these rules, and now I immediately have a game to play in that I can jump in and see how the rules work and see how things are. So that maybe I'll spin off my own home game, or maybe I'll just play in this game. Maybe I'll just be a DM in this bigger campaign, because I do want to make it easy for people to DM alongside me in this version of the campaign, where that wasn't really a goal for campaign 5. And then I'm going to a bunch of conventions this year, if I can get my shit together, and go to like Origins and go to Gen Con, and be able to go to those things and be able to hand out copies of the quick start and be able to run the quick start for people and be like, hey, if you want to join in this campaign, this is what's going on. And hopefully be able to say, cool, the go button, right? Real deal session 1, we're running out here with our 5 intro adventure seeds, is as soon as I get back from Gen Con this year, which will be the beginning of August. So that is the plan. And we'll sort of see how it goes. I will say, BST said, I'm interested in playing and running. The only issue is I'm broke. The campaign is for patrons. It is $5 a month. In my current plan is, if you are able to run 2 games, then you'll go down sort of a tier of cost, right? So there are other tiers that have other benefits. You can pay for $5 or $10 or $15 a month or whatever you want to do. If you run 2 games in a month, you get that tier, right? So you could get, hey, I will get the adventurer tier for free if I run 2 games. You run 4 games in a month, well, you get the heroic tier benefits. You're crazy, you're like me, you run 6 games in a month, you're running more than 1 game a week, well, then you'll get all the benefits that go with the Paragon tier in the Patreon. So you can actually, so I can give sort of cool rewards and things to people, including things like being able to play for free, being able to be more involved on the creator side of things. And also, like, there's some other stuff that I'm going to be doing with the Patreon where, like, if you have if you're one of the people that's playing in the campaign and you're like, hey, I'm having this problem in my game, I need someone to talk to about it, I'm going to be running office hours for patrons, where it's like, if you're going to be a DM and you're like, I can't get a group together, I need help getting a group together, or I've got a group together and we've backed ourselves into a corner, right? There's been some crazy nonsense and I don't know I don't know what the next step should be, or I have this problem player or whatever. Being able to have access to someone who can kind of bounce ideas off of you, and you can bounce ideas off of them, and you can sort of brainstorm how to get your ways out of problems, is really, really handy. And it's something I want to be able to offer for the community. So, yes. So the idea is 2 games a month. Yeah. So if you ran a bi-weekly game, you say, hey, I'll run every other Saturday or something, that would be enough to be able to do it. Again, I don't know if this is going to be the 100% in perpetuity, exactly how everything's going to be. But that is the current thinking, the current plan. All right. Well, Ferd, great talking to you again. Great seeing you. Miss having you at table, both here and at the distillery where we got to play sometimes. Hope everything goes well. I will say selfishly, I hope you have a success, not a critical success in your New York plans. I hope you get the things that you want, but still have free time, because there's some other stuff that you didn't get. But if you critically succeed on getting into your intensive program and you have no spare time, I will also be happy for you, even if I don't get to see you at table. So,
all right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.